Smashlock, November 2016.
You're going to have a revolt on your hands. And then all of these city dwellers are going to come face to face with the harsh reality of war. Siege tactics. The farmers are going to stop sending them food. And the guys who mine their coal, who keep their fucking lights on, are going to stop doing that. And then in about 14 days, when they run out of food and everything is spoiled on the shelves of their supermarkets, they're going to come stumbling out, lost and disoriented into the fucking wilderness that is rural America, where everyone's a gun-loving Second Amendment guy.
And they're being taught that it's important to have views, and they're not being taught that it's important to know what you're talking about.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
But this virus remains extremely dangerous.
Fear and germs, why these fucking pussies?
This is Apostasy Now.
To get people actually to love their certitude. This is the ultimate in malevolent revolution.
Get ready to root for the bad guys.
This is the world now being run by teenagers. Does nobody know anything?
Welcome back to Apostasy Now. First time in over half a year. We'll explain that at the beginning and through the video. Just know that the audio is a little bit rougher than normal because we're using new headsets, new equipment that I've gotten, and that's not going to be a problem in the future. Glad to have you back. Hope you enjoy the conversation and the conversations with guests we'll have in the future.
Smashlock, January 2021.
If we are here and you want to argue about protecting the community, that's fine. But if we're sacrificing our humanity to save a community, then there's no community to save.
Wow, that is profound. You guys need to mark that out. I'm serious.
They're being hunted down like enemies of their own government and treated worse than drug dealers and murderers or rapists. A line has been crossed. You're either with the peaceful truckers or you are with the left-wing fascists. And that's what's been happening. And it's been a strong line. We stand with the truckers and we stand with the Canadian people in their noble quest to reclaim their freedom.
We're back for the first time in nearly a year, over half a year.
Yeah, well, it's been a while. We've done other recordings, but then shit hit the fan and, you lost your job.
I know where it is. I know where it is. I haven't lost it. I know exactly where that job is.
Yeah. Right up their fucking ass. Geez. So there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in the last little while. We've had a lot of great conversations. Just unfortunately, nobody who listens to us got to hear them.
Right off the bat, seems like a lot of people are curious to hear from people in Canada, especially since I'm a truck driver. I've been getting questions. Move this headset around a little bit. We got new gear here.
Your head's too big.
Yeah. Yeah. Truckers had a big convoy. It was ended up in protest. At certain points, they blockaded major arteries like bridges and crossings for U.S. trade.
Yeah, Emerson, Coots, the Ambassador Bridge, and Surrey, BC.
And so I was not able to be involved in these things. I basically had a month of bad health.
Yeah.
But, before that, they were pressuring first doctors and anyone who worked on a plane, anyone who works on a train, but not an automobile.
Yeah.
Right. And so truck drivers, my company brought in their own mandate, and I don't think they consulted a lawyer. I think they assumed that they'd be under the federal mandate. So the way it works, I think in the U.S. as well, but definitely in Canada, is that we are naturally provincially governed as a business as long as you don't meet certain criteria. And as truck companies, since we had people going across the border in a province, that meant that we were federally regulated. But they had not mandated the trucking industry at this point. So my company brought it in. And by the time I think that they figured out that it was wrong and that then they started lying to us. And then I brought to their attention there was no government mandate. Then they switched their tune enough to say that instead of saying we resigned because we refused to do the mandate for safety reasons, that was the health and safety, right?
Yeah.
So then we would be counted as resigning. And then in the end, on the last day, it seems like they just decided, no, we're just going to fire you.
Yeah. So what was it? Termination with cause.
Yeah. And though they dragged it out for 2 months, my unemployment insurance, EI up here, they finally sided with me because my company had committed so many violations. Like it was, I won't go into it here, but it was just like this pattern of abusive behavior and neglect. So my company was just like, you know what, you're getting your money and we're going to say that you quit, but we're going to say that you quit because your company put unreasonable, untenable conditions on you.
Well, that worked out well for you, but unfortunately that didn't work out well for a lot of other truckers, which is what I think was at least in part what led to this convoy. So anyone who isn't in Canada probably knows more or has more accurate information than people within Canada about the convoy. So the thing that you need to understand, and I know that we've touched on this before in other recordings, is that the media up here in Canada is state funded. All right, so the Liberal government gives over $1 billion a year to different media outlets. And when you go and you look at their breakdown of their expenditures and their revenue streams, what they get from the government represents probably north of 70% or 80% of the money that they get. They do not get a lot from advertising. And the CBC, CTV, Global News are terrible.
It's propaganda at this point.
It's pure propaganda. They act and pretend like there are not thousands of hours of unfiltered, unedited live streams from people who are roaming the streets of Ottawa. Well, this convoy was there.
Well, they were caught by people with their own phones out recording them, doing things like recording the opposite way of the convoy. So they're like, oh, there's like a few trucks over there.
Right.
Technically, they're at the location, and they're just lying because they're not facing the other way of the camera, showing where everyone is.
Yeah, the dishonesty through omission or obfuscation.
But the most disturbing thing is that they take their points that they're going to say and what direction they're going to go with their reporting directly from the government.
Absolutely. And the worst part was, I do not remember which anchor it was on CBC, but they interviewed a professor of communications or something. It was some position that, you know, was only important to the convoy in the context of how it was being received by the public and by the media, and why the convoy was engaging in American-style politics and anti-media rhetoric, right? Like, they are shocked and in awe of the fact that these people who they have been defaming and branding as Nazis for the better part of a month don't trust them or like them. And then they went on to quote this lady who they brought onto the show that without truth, I don't know, it was some weird quote. It was like, without truth, there is no shared sense of reality. Without this, there's no that. And, you know, it was a garbage quote, because what they're basically trying to do is gaslight the regular viewer into believing that the view of reality that you can see, like if I walk outside right now and film your street with my phone.
Not to trust that.
And I mean, look, I know of about 10 live streamers that were doing nothing but walking back and forth up Wellington and all of the other surrounding streets, through the park, over the bridge, past the hotel, all around. And then they would circle back and they would listen to the people in the live chat, and they would go, oh, there's something going on over there, and they would go over there. And some of it was just people being trolls and misleading them, and other things were legitimate, like, oh, there's cops stealing gas over here, and then they would go and they would see the cops stealing gas.
Did you ever think you'd say a sentence like that?
In Canada?
A uniformed cop stealing gas, or cops plural.
Yeah, well,
they were trying to freeze them out by taking their ability to make fires with wood.
Yep.
That was earlier on. I mean, in the end, the cop that they brought in, the chief of police in Ottawa,
what was his name, Steve Bell or something?
As bad as he was already, he resigned because he knew what they were telling him to do, and he wouldn't.
Oh, Solly, the first guy.
Yeah, and so the guy they brought in, if you watch footage of this guy, if you can see him, he looks forward to violence.
Oh, he loves
is a total thug. He should never have been given a police uniform. And they brought him in, and then they brought in, for instance, where we live, they took 2 of the cops, as far as I know.
I think it was
volunteered.
It was only 2. I thought it was 5, but so, okay.
At different police stations, they took the most eager to do violence cops from around the country, brought them into one spot, and then went out and started intimidating, threatening, hitting, covering stuff up. Like, they were just a gang of thugs.
Yeah.
Covering up. In Canada, it's illegal for them to cover up their identification, but they did.
Well, the Quebec cops did. Those were the Quebec cops that were the ones in the green military uniforms.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, they were from Quebec. And from what I heard, Don't quote me on it, but from what I heard, the cops on horseback were at Vancouver, but I thought they were from Peel in Toronto. So there's conflicting
Either way,
reports.
they sought out the people who love violence and wanted an excuse to unleash for a change on the public.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. That's why we had horses running over people. And even with the police knowing the footage was out there, they still said, oh yeah, well basically those people attacked the police by throwing themselves underneath the horses.
Okay, so let's let's unravel reality here, because there are going to be people who talk about conspiracy theories, because we always get labeled as conspiracy theorists.
Hold on. Before we go any further, I should also say that I lived in Ottawa for 4 years. So, for instance, every time they showed one of the streets, I knew exactly where it was. When they were referencing different monuments, I knew where it was, buildings. And this is important because Ottawa is not like a normal town. It has about 1 million people altogether, especially if you include the parts of the city that are on the Quebec side across the river.
Gatineau, right?
Yeah, all Gatineau. And it functions in many ways like one city because they're so close. But Ottawa was a dinky collection of towns and stuff before the government, many years ago, obviously generations, chose it as our capital, because they tried Montreal first and Montreal burned it down when they got mad at the government. So then they were going to do Toronto, but then they thought, well, if the Americans ever invade again, it's a strategically bad spot because they can reach it too easily. So they chose Ottawa because they had a plan with this canal connected to the lakes, but it was further north. Yet it wasn't in Quebec, where they were afraid it was going to get burned down again.
Right.
So completely artificial town was constructed over the years. People in this town, they don't have heavy industrial. Like when I was there, this is now 15 years ago or more, but they didn't have any heavy industrial except for one toilet paper factory directly across the river from Parliament, which we all thought was appropriate considering the shit that comes out of there, right? But everybody else was like, you go straight from, would you like fries with that? Or maybe folding boxes to pack things, right?
Yeah.
And then you pass all the manufacturing and you go straight to government office work. And when people are like, oh, the locals, the convoy was in downtown in front of Parliament. People don't realize that there are no locals there, right? There's small shops and stuff, yes. But the other locals, besides the small shops, who loved the business they were getting from protesters. In fact, it was helping them after 2 years of no business in the downtown area. So they weren't the ones complaining. The ones who were complaining were the banks and the investment companies. And the people who had set up these large offices had these big buildings that they're constantly working with the government to get deals.
Right.
That's what's downtown.
Right.
Those are the people who were getting hurt. And they acted as if they were like mom and pop shops. And that's what the news spread.
Right. So, okay. So let's back this up here. So we've already established our media is terrible, right?
It's, for Americans, it's worse than CNN.
It is worse than CNN. So let's lay it out for them. So the government brings in a vaccine mandate for cross-border truckers.
Yeah.
Guys that are going to be in their cab by themselves a majority of the time. Now, how is this unscientific? All right. So without getting into the medical stuff of it, the genie's already out of the bottle. Yeah. All right. The virus is already spreading in the community, in the country, on both sides of the border. All right. So Omicron is already out. All right. We have massive spread, massive levels of infections throughout November, December, January. It peaks, and then it drops off like a stone. All right. And then they're bringing in this vaccine mandate. What was it? January 15th is when it came into effect?
Oh, sorry.
January 15th is when it came into effect, the vaccine mandate.
I'm not sure the exact date, but somewhere around that.
Yeah. So the truckers are mad about this.
I'm not exactly clear because I don't. That's another thing. Dude, when I got fired, I never crossed the border. I never went out of province, right? I could have done my job. I had a night shift for 4 years, my run. I could have done it without even talking to someone all night and affected my job at all.
Right.
My company still, that's the influence of government. They still thought that they could get away with firing me and that I would be the one who's bad.
Right.
And I was an asset to the company. Perfect driving record. I actually brought down their expenses.
Yeah.
This is the type of madness that Justin Trudeau and his people have spun.
Right. So there's no reason why, even for cross-border truckers, they needed to have this mandate. But of course, when people started to complain and bellyache about it, all they said is, oh, well, the Biden administration also has their own mandate. So even if we lifted our mandate, the Americans would still have theirs. Such a disingenuous argument. As if your most valuable northern trading partner, if your most valuable trading partner said, listen, there's really not much reason for us to have our mandate because it doesn't make any sense. Do you think that maybe you could think about dropping yours? Maybe they don't do it right away, but I'm thinking that the Americans might consider that a good deal. You know, like, okay, you know what? Yeah, Omicron's spreading in both countries. What's the point? It's already on the downswing. Most people either have vaccination or natural immunity. What's the point? All right. So there's that argument to be had. But from the moment the convoy reached about Alberta, that was when Justin Chucklefuck Trudeau decides to take note of it. So then the media gets him on the podium and they ask him what he thinks of this convoy. And he proceeds to say that they are a small, fringe minority with unacceptable views. This is old news now. Anyone listening to this, I'm just rehashing how we got to where we are.
Yeah.
And the media ran with this. And the media just said, yes, they represent a small minority. Fringe minority. Now, whether you believe that or not, whether it is 1%, 10%, or 20% of the population that agreed with the truckers is moot. What they tried to do was gerrymander and manipulate the numbers. All right. So they said, listen, 90% of truckers are vaccinated. And they attempted to conflate the amount of people vaccinated with the support for the mandate. Right. And they've done this throughout the entire pandemic. Our media has done this and our government officials has done this. So 85% of the general population of Ontario is vaccinated. So 80% of the population of Ontario then would agree with Doug Ford's vaccine passport.
Right.
It beggars belief that they can say these things out loud and not expect some pushback. Because how many of those people got the vaccine because they felt compelled to keep their job,
right? Or
they felt compelled to keep family and friendships.
Yeah,
they felt compelled to just to be able to go to work, go to school, go hang out at a bar or go to a movie. We can argue about whether or not those were cowardly reasons or not to do it, or practical reasons to do it or not. I don't really care about that part of it. But then to take those people that you've forced into a series of ever-escalating impossible positions, to force them in a direction, to coerce them in a direction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And then say, oh, well, this many people caved, therefore this many people agree.
Well,
that's bullshit.
I can just tell you from where I work that somewhere between a quarter to maybe topside a half of people that where I work were fine with the vaccination and didn't care about the mandate. There might have been a small number who were really proud of the mandate my company put in.
Yeah.
But even the ones who got the vaccination really didn't care about that. They either already had it done for their own reasons or they were told to, so they went ahead and then the last, at least half of the company, most didn't do what I did, which was stand my ground. I was not going to medical privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, to a auto parts manufacturer and distributor company, as if they have any business or any say about my medical. And that's me and my doctor.
Well, you'd like to think
as
so,
is
anyway.
Enshrined as the very first modern human rights on an international scale, let alone the basis of all human rights. No, I didn't think that was justified, so I said no. And they ended up firing me, and as far as I understand, a few other people. But I know the majority of those people that begrudgingly, in the later part of their time, decided to go along with it. It is not that they supported it. They did not support it. They thought it was wrong, and it bothered them a lot that they had to do this, but they felt compelled to keep their job.
Right.
And that is the disgrace of a so-called prime minister, a spoiled brat narcissist who only thinks of himself, who will say whatever he feels like saying without any moral qualm whatsoever, taking those people that now he is forced into this situation and taking their freedoms away and then grouping them as his supporters on the news.
Right. And it was probably far too aggressive a point to make, but you remember when it was around Christmas time, I was talking to our friend there, and he works from home. He has the luxury of having a job that he can do remotely, and he's not really bothered by all this stuff.
By the way, some companies that you work remotely for are still forcing.
Yeah, which is
even though you're in your own home,
which is ridiculous, but whatever. I guess they think if you come back to the office for whatever reason, but. Anyways, I remember the look on your face because I usually don't go for the throat with my own friends. And I said, I understand why none of this bothers you. It's because you're fucking oblivious. All right. It doesn't affect you, so it doesn't bother you. And what I'm telling you is that it is affecting the people around you. Excuse me, I got the hiccups.
Yeah. It's one thing to hear about it affecting people. It's another when it comes for you. And trust me, I know.
Yeah. So, well, yes, precisely. Yeah. So the media and the government continued to pick apart the protests. So this convoy is traveling across the country, comically, actually, if you really want to think about it, thousands of kilometers east to west, or west to east.
By the way, the U.S. now has one starting up, and
California and Arizona.
I hope all the best for them, man.
Right. But anyways, some of these truckers only have to travel a few hundred kilometers north-south to do their runs. But now they're traveling perhaps 10 times that distance to head to Ottawa to make a point. And all along the way, there are people who are filming this on TikTok, on YouTube, and every overpass is filled with people.
Yep.
Every overpass has, maybe not filled, but like hundreds of
heroes.
people.
They're looking at these people. Thank you for being our heroes.
Right.
For taking time off of work, going through the risk, making this statement. We can't all do it, but we are supporting you.
Right. And along the way, at truck stops and at gas stations and en routes, there were people with pallets of food, water, toilet papers and other toiletries, toothpaste, warm clothes, changes of socks, blankets. These people became not just a convoy, but a movement of goods, right? Like an entire supply chain unto itself. By the time it arrived in Ottawa, a lot of people either had to turn around, within the province. So they followed the convoy for just the province that they were in. But there was no doubt that there were at least 1,000 or more trucks that arrived in Ottawa. Some people were really over the top with their exaggerations. They're like, there's 1 million people in Ottawa now. And it's like, you mean the population or not the truckers?
I think that's what it meant, is that normally the population, when I was there, I think it was just below 1 million.
Yeah.
And I think that they were basically bumped it above that level. And then someone else grabbed it and ran with it. There just wasn't 1 million protesters.
No, not even.
That would have been, there wouldn't have been supplies for that.
No. So, but regardless of all that, the media continued to crap on them the entire time that they were coming and saying, well, what are they really about? What's their message? First it was about vaccine mandates, but now it's about mandates in general. Oh, and they want to knock down the government. And so this all spawned from a memorandum of understanding that a couple of the organizers wrote, and I thought was ill-advised. Like, as far as delegitimizing your own movement in the eyes of the establishment, having anything in your memorandum that says we want you to dissolve the government with the governor general and then have the Senate select blah, 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 blah. They did actually write that. I read it. It was ridiculous. And I don't think they ever intended it to be taken seriously. I think what they were hoping for is that there would be enough people and enough momentum and enough noise that the government would just capitulate to their demands. And then...
Well, also, when you negotiate, you can't start from where exactly you want to end.
No.
That's a fool who negotiates.
Right, but I mean, of the negotiating tools that they employed, requesting that the government of an egotistical, narcissistic son of a bitch step down, he's not going to step down. They knew he wasn't going to step down.
Right, but this is what I'm saying is that all the people want to jump on Donald Trump. Feel free to do that. It's your freedom. But he knew how to negotiate with people. So a guy with his level of experience in making deals with people would know that when they came up with those demands, he wouldn't see it as, oh my God, this is an existential threat to my enemies that destroyed. That's the difference between a narcissist and a stupid narcissist. Justin Trudeau is an unbelievably stupid man. And I'm not just saying that to be mean. He is a vapid, unthinking person. And so what he saw that was as a threat. Instead, he should have seen it as an opening salvo for him to step in and negotiate from that point towards where he wanted it.
Right.
But he doesn't negotiate because he's a spoiled child. He wants everything his own way immediately, and everyone needs to tell him how amazing and wonderful he is at every turn.
Yeah. And
again, Americans may not remember this or know this in the first place. One of the first things he did as prime minister is he hired a professional cameraman to follow him around while he posed for pictures, running around topless on hiking trails, meeting with people supposedly, out of the blue, posing with them for selfies, going on canoeing trips, getting pictures all the time, sitting in a restaurant, pictures, always glossy, getting his hair done.
Right. So the convoy arrives in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And it turns into an absolute party. On the very first day...
by the way, Ottawa's good for that too.
Are good for parties?
So there's Canada Day. It's always like a big party there. They have Tulip Festival, which is an actual festival party there. And then I remember one year when I was there, the men and the women's hockey team both took gold. And I didn't know what was going on at first when I was walking down the street. People hanging out their windows, honking their horns, shouting and screaming, and then just suddenly a spontaneous party for hours on Rideau Street.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That would have been neat to see. But anyways, these guys arrive there. They block up the streets. Now, this is kind of, I'm trying to make sure that I keep everything kind of contained because I wasn't there. And maybe not everyone who listens to us is Canadian, so they won't understand.
Mostly, actually, our audience is more American than is Canadian.
Right. So these guys roll into town. The police did not barricade off the streets on Parliament Hill where they were going. So Rideau Street and Wellington all of a sudden became packed with trucks. Right across the bridge where it changes to, like, the name of the street changes, going past the Rideau Center. Ottawa shuts down the mall because on the first day they all went into the malls without masks, and the media's freaking out on them that they're not wearing masks in the mall. Meanwhile, you have to understand these people want to drop the mandates, but you want them to obey the mandates. Like, this is counterintuitive. They're already there to rabble rouse, and they want the mandates gone, and yet you are pissing on them because they're not following the mandates. Like, it's completely divorced from reality. And then the media continues to pick away at them because on the first major day of demonstrations, there's a guy with a Nazi flag walking around. No,
that was the Confederate flag was one guy.
No. It was one guy with a Nazi flag.
The Nazi flag, there was like 3 or 4 people that had this flag. I remember. Because I remember, I knew immediately where they were. They were not with the convoy. They were in the park.
Oh, okay.
Across the canal.
Oh, okay. So but there was one particular Nazi flag. Like, it was a full Nazi flag, freshly pressed. Like, this thing is brand new.
There was a Lemanberg flag that most of you are not going to know this. But there's a very popular group with young people on YouTube. What are they called? I'm blanking on this. It's the one my daughter loves so. It's headed by a guy named Dream. The Dream SMP. That's what they call it. It's a collective of people with talent. They do a lot of stuff around Minecraft and music. Anyways, they do these fictional things on Minecraft. They put them online, and they made a fictional kingdom called Lemanberg, and they had a flag for it. And people could buy this stuff online, like it's a nation, right?
Okay.
And this was on the gate of Parliament, a big one, right? Now, even I saw it because my daughter has like a painting of it from a friend. And so does that mean that there's a big contingency of these truckers that were into Lemanberg?
Right.
The kind of stupidity of you see one guy with a flag you don't like, and then that becomes the news story is unbelievably brain dead.
But it gets better than this. So because I think the guy with the Confederate flag was a plant. So there was a video by one of the live streamers. The protesters surrounded the guy with the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
One guy can be clearly heard saying something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, "What the fuck are you doing here? What do you want? You're just some sort of plant. You here for the media to take pictures of you?" Shit like that.
Yeah.
And this guy is the only guy in a crowd of protesters that is wearing a full mask. All you can see is his lips, and he's got this full balaclava on with sunglasses, carrying a Confederate flag tied to a hockey stick, and he gets surrounded by protesters. And even though you can't see his face, you can tell by his body language that he's nervous.
Yeah.
All right. And they boo him and shame him, and he fucks off. He disappears into the ether. Then there's this other guy with a full-on Nazi flag off in the distance, and he never really got close to the main body of the protest. And then there were people with like Nazi symbolism, but it was like the swastika made out of needles. Like, I mean, I think
the group I'm thinking of, like 3 or 4 people, they got off the bus, had the flag. The mainstream media happened to be right there, took pictures of them as if it was part of the convoy. And then somehow they made their way into nearby, I forget what that hotel is.
I can't remember
beside
its name.
Parliament. So they were seen like on the outside of that building. This was clearly, okay, so another thing, just a few blocks away from Parliament is the University of Ottawa. And this is not to knock that university, it's the one I went to. It's not to knock that university in particular, but understand there are 2 universities in this town. They're big, right? And the whole town itself, like I say, is already government heavy and business heavy. So whenever there's something big that's going on, like a G7 meeting or something like that, these people will come out that are kind of produced by these environments. Not everyone is, but there'll be a number that are produced every year on an ongoing basis that we call, in the States they're called Antifa. We have some called that here now, but it's Black Bloc is the proper term for it. They are leftists, and they believe in certain tactics where they try and create problems for their enemies. And, if it's a government meeting, then they're directly trying to undermine the government. But in this case, when they came out, it was the truckers. They think they're all Nazis because these people are all brainwashed and they are militants, right? So they're setting off bombs, but they believe in doing whatever it takes to destroying their enemies. Yeah. So a group of them getting out of a bus, They all live at Mama's house. They get out of a bus and they unfurl their Nazi flag and they make their way into the hotel. This is a very common type of thing to see from. Or there was footage I saw where they were sprinkling nails out on a roadway.
Right.
Because they don't drive cars and they don't care about what they're doing. They don't understand what they're doing. So it's not just the government sending plants in. These people are generated, especially at that age, young people. They want to do something with their life. And you never see conservative groups acting expressly communist mindset.
For sure. And so, like, to tie this all up, so all these major instances of Nazi symbolism and Confederate symbolism all happened generally within the first 2 days. I'm not saying it didn't continue beyond that, but generally speaking, it was within the first 2 days. Well, then all of a sudden, the media is running with it. They're Nazi. They're white supremacists. They have deep-seated anti-Islamic, anti-government. They're insurrectionists. Like everything that came out of the United States on January 6th, they attempted to frame around these truckers. And the media then took anyone who had our position of it and basically said that we were apologists for racists.
Yeah.
Now, you need to understand how this is divorced from reality. So this trucker convoy comes into Ottawa. Ottawa's police force is not prepared for this, even though they had several weeks to prepare. It's not like it was a shock that this convoy was coming. They knew it was coming.
Right. The person who was shocked was Trudeau.
And I think they were all shocked because I think what they were assuming is that if they picked at them and picked at them and picked at them while they were coming and said, it's just a fringe minority, it's not that many, they don't represent this, they don't represent that, they're just tiny, insignificant, unwashed masses, that they would feel sad and pathetic and that many of their supporters would just bleed away. And what happened was the exact opposite. They picked up momentum. They got angry about being...
normal tactic of their Nazis and racists, white supremacists, it backfired. It actually generated more support.
Right.
Because at this point, let's all be honest, we all know whether you're a person that uses that tactic or you're a person who gets hit by that tactic or opposes that tactic, we all know it's a tactic. There are millions and millions of white supremacists. Most people these days in the West are not rabid, active racists. They might be ignorant about something that you think they should be corrected about, but it's not a political incentive, right? So we all know it's a tactic. And so when he started doing it this time, it was the final straw. He stripped us basically of our dignity and our rights for 2 years. Now we were going to support these people that were going to see him even more.
Yeah. And you know what I think made it worse is that when the convoy was, I think, in Saskatchewan, and they had the transportation minister on Power and Politics, I believe was the segment that he was on, and they talked to him about the possibility of dropping the mandate. And he's like, no, we ran on this. 90% of truckers are vaccinated anyway. Again, trying to conflate the number of truckers that are vaccinated with support for the mandate. He went one step further and said, I'm not entirely certain how the topic came up, but he said, we're even thinking of instituting a cross-provincial mandate. So trucks that drive from Saskatchewan to Manitoba or Alberta to, whatever, they were going to have to be vaccinated to travel between provinces. A clear violation of Section 6 of the Charter.
That's because the magical fairy, COVID fairy, came along and told them about the fact that this was magically going to happen to cause an epidemic if suddenly people moved around their own country.
Right. So now they've upped the ante. They're saying not only are we going to prevent you from being able to do your job across the country, but if you were thinking of just avoiding the mandate by being able to drive in your own country, we're going to mess with that too. So needless to say, they get into Ottawa, and these unreasonable white supremacist insurrectionists who are there to disrupt and occupy and overthrow the government listen to local civil engineers and move their trucks off the bridge because idling trucks on the bridge might cause problems.
True.
So very unreasonable on the part of people looking to destroy the seat of power.
Well, and that was another thing added to the anxiety of the government. By the way, by this time, Trudeau had fled and said he thought he might be sick with COVID.
Yes.
Which the record of that doctor saying that has never been forwarded to anyone. He went and he fled, I think, for a total of 10 days and started scheming behind the scenes, but don't want to face it because this was an existential threat to a narcissist that he might actually know seen as not perfect and almighty. But I think one of the things that frightened him was that the locals responded, unlike the news saying this, but the locals responded very positively to the truckers showing up.
Yeah, I don't think that there's quite the level of local disdain for the truckers, even now.
No. No matter where you are, you've got the people who bitch that you didn't get a shot. or bitch that you don't just do what the government says, or bitch that you talk about rights. That minority of troublemakers who cause misery for most of us are going to be present anywhere. Right. There might be a higher proportion in a government town, but the vast majority of people saw this as a celebration, protest. They have them all the time. This one was just particularly special because we've been going through shit for 2 years, and here's a group of people from all across Canada that have shown up from the working class, what the left always says that they speak for, the working class. When they show up, what happens? They're seen as existential threats.
Yeah, we love you as long as you stay away.
Yeah, as long as you shut up and do what you're told.
Right. So these people are parked into the streets, and these unreasonable racists leave a single emergency lane open in all the streets that they block so that emergency vehicles and services can go out. They don't block the sidewalks. They
shoveled snow. They picked up garbage. They
laid
fed
salt.
homeless people.
Right. Oh, and that was the other thing. There was a rumor that they stole food from the homeless.
Right.
Okay. So I need people to understand when the media says that it's people like myself and Mr. Dragonbeard who are the conspiracy theorists about this and who are apologists for the truckers. I want to lay this out for you in a single logical argument. You are a truck convoy, people who deal with logistics every day, who travel for a living hundreds of kilometers, if not thousands of kilometers. And now you are planning a convoy from east to west, west to east, north to south. It doesn't matter. You're coming from all across the country, converging into a singular central location.
Yeah.
You know it's going to take you a long time to get there. As you are traveling across the country, overpass after overpass and rest stop after rest stop are filled with people who are handing you pallets of toilet paper, toiletries, toothpaste, socks, blankets, food, baked goods, soups, you name it.
Yeah.
And so now these people packed to the ceilings of their trailers and cabs with food and supplies get to Ottawa, and then three of them go to a soup kitchen locally and demand to be fed. And now you are going, let's say, for sake of argument, there were just 3 shitty truckers that didn't bring any food or supplies, and they were hungry and angry and decided to go raid a soup kitchen. Okay, those 3 are pieces of shit. Or they were probably 3 locals that were trying to make trouble.
Look, so we're talking about pieces of shit. So I feel obligated to bring up, again, I lived in this town for 4 years. There's an area they just call it the Market. It's the Bywood Market or whatever. They're named after Colonel By. This is not the gay district, by the way. That's on Bank Street.
Oh.
You make bank in By, and if you're By, you go to bank. Anyways, the Market used to be a really tough neighborhood, back in like the 70s. That's where bike gangs would go and stuff like this. Prostitutes were all over the place, and it was pretty rough. From what I'm told from people whose parents I knew when I was there.
Yeah.
But now it tends to be dance clubs, outdoor markets, organic stuff being sold, whatever, there's all kinds of stuff there. And anyways, when you go through here, the University of Ottawa is right close to all this stuff. So you would go there and you'd have people going herb. They'd see the herb, weed, herb. It's illegal now, but at the time it was not. So they were selling you dime bags and stuff of weed. This is how people would make their money. Right. And so these people every so often, every few months, they would do like a sweep program and get them off the street because they were embarrassing or whatever. Meanwhile, just down the street, they had Parliament. Their drug dealers never got swept. They had the good shit and they made the good money. These were the guys that were on the inside. Right. But the people down in the Market, the working class people, they're an embarrassment. We got to clean that up.
So, that's fucking great.
Just to give you an idea of the atmosphere, you just kind of have to get used to it after a while.
So these guys are honking their horns. Cleaning the streets, shoveling snow.
Shoveling more than just snow, I bet.
Yeah, and clearing their own garbage. Now, are they violating bylaws and parking bylaws? Absolutely. No. When somebody said that there was lawlessness there, the media is attempting to take the Confederate flags and the Nazi symbolism, either from plants or bad actors, and then extend that out throughout the entire convoy.
Yeah.
And they use the old adage that it's the company that you keep, but they don't apply that same branding to, let's say, the prime minister and his cabinet and his party, Justin Blackface Trudeau.
Can I just say, the expression you just used, people these days seem to be unable to understand anymore a common sense thing about the difference between personal enlightenment and social reality. Okay, so when you say the company you keep, this is meant to be a reflection of yourself or an individual you're dealing with. It's not meant to be the right of association, right? So in other words, if you're around 100 people, and one of them's an asshole, that doesn't mean you're all assholes. It's meant to reflect on something about your own life, like a person's life.
Yeah.
And you can see this too with the new Trekkie people that like this shit on Discovery, right? And Picard. They go, oh, well, Star Trek's always been communist, cause Spock, in Star Trek 2, I know I'm getting a little geeky here, but it's relevant to how people think these days. He said when he was dying, the good of the many outweigh the good of the one.
Or the needs of the one or the
needs
few.
of the one or the few.
Yeah.
But this was a personal choice he was making, a personal philosophy. He did not endorse that to be forced onto everyone else.
Yeah, forgiving the fact that it was a military situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But these truckers did all of this, and then when they heard the rumors that somebody had raided the soup kitchen, there is a video online of the same woman who was interviewed by the CBC complaining about truckers essentially stealing food from the homeless, bringing a pickup truck full of bread, sodas, sandwiches, baked goods, soups, and dropping it off. They had a team of people coming out of the back door of the soup kitchen, and this woman who was just interviewed on CBC is going, oh my God, thank you. Oh wow, that's so great. And these people are unloading food because whether it was true or not that truckers or locals opposing as truckers raided the soup kitchen or took a meal that they weren't deserving of, these truckers took it upon themselves out of charity and the fact that they had all this extra goods to give it to the soup kitchen out of a sense of communal obligation. All right.
Yeah.
The barbecues and the other food vendors that they set up, I guess, for this convoy were feeding the truckers families, feeding the locals that came out to support, and feeding the homeless. Some of these homeless people, from rumors I heard, got to sleep in cabs of trucks.
Yeah.
They let them come in and get warm.
Right.
When it was like -30 out and these homeless people who wander around the area had nowhere to go.
Well, and then there's also the fact, okay, I live there. They have homeless people that are normally not in front of Parliament, but a couple of times they made it look like they were part of the protest when the news was filming them. These people are mentally ill. So back in like the 80s when they started shutting down all these mental facilities, these large mental asylums and stuff like that, instead of creating new locations, a lot of these people were sent into the community. So I've listened to psychiatrists talking about how many of them ended up in prisons and homeless on the street. And in Ottawa, there's a contingency of these people. And they are out of their mind. And so a couple of times I saw footage of this where someone out of their mind I think he was taking his pants down at one point. So the cops all started arresting him and the news was like this was some kind of a protester. And the protesters are all standing around like, what is wrong with this guy?
So what else did they get accused of? They got accused of desecrating the Terry Fox statue. Now, again, I need to lay this out for you.
First of all, tell them who Terry Fox is, because
so Terry Fox was a young man who suffered from, I believe the cancer was osteosarcoma, which grows on the long bones of the limbs. That's actually the same cancer my sister passed away of.
Oh, okay.
So same cancer, different location on the body. Hers was inoperable. So they removed Terry Fox's one leg to try and get ahead of the cancer. He had a prosthetic leg, and then to raise awareness and funds and whatnot, he decided to run from Canada. I believe
all the way across Canada.
Yeah, all the way across Canada. I think
we're one of the biggest countries on Earth. I think the second largest country on the planet.
Right. So he started his run. It was very difficult, but it was very, even in its time, like in his own time, it kind of picked up a real media frenzy. And he became kind of somewhat of a national icon.
Yeah.
And somewhere around Thunder Bay, I think, is where it was when he took ill. It turned out that his cancer had returned, and shortly thereafter he passed away. Along the route, if I'm correct, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but along the route they have erected statues of him in the different locations that he was set to run through.
Yeah.
And there's one out front of Parliament. So
I'm not sure if he was going to go through Parliament or it's just a national symbol that they put him there, but either way.
They put a hat on him, they tied a Canadian flag around his back, and generally adorned him in symbolism of Canadian symbolism. It's a Canadian flag.
He's an icon. Like you say, he's an icon.
Right. So the media was incensed by this. Again, trying to paint the protesters or the convoy as disgraceful because they were desecrating this monument to a Canadian icon. Well, here's where I take issue with that. A number of people pointed out that there was a different Terry Fox statue, some in a different location, where a liberal politician, I'm not sure if he was provincial or federal, but wherever this liberal politician was, he was holding a rainbow patterned.
That was Terry Fox. This was a different occasion. If you're thinking of the one I saw, it was a different occasion, and it was a gay pride. I don't know if it was their event or they were just there, but they put gay pride flags and imagery on him, and they didn't mean it in a negative way, like they were desecrating it. They thought it was positive.
Right. So Terry Fox is a Canadian icon.
Yeah.
They adorned Terry Fox in the rainbow flag with a liberal parliament member or a liberal politician standing behind him, holding a liberal sign that was also rainbow patterned. Now, to be fair, Terry Fox, as far as I'm aware, never really stated one way or the other whether or not he supported the LGBTQ community. It was the 80s when he died, so chances are it still would have been a bit taboo to talk about whether he supported it or not.
He started his run in 1980, and I think he died in 81. I was just checking what I thought.
So if it's not desecration to adorn Terry Fox in LGBTQ paraphernalia and political imagery, then dressing him in the Canadian flag and Convoy 2022 hat is equally not bad.
This is what's been lost, is the idea that, okay, so if a Muslim group had some type of an event and they put a Muslim or Islamic memorabilia or whatever on them, and they took pictures with it, and they were doing it not in a negative way, it's a very positive way, that would not be complained about by the media. But if a pro-Christian group came along and did that, it would be complained about. You know, there's always one group, perfectly fine. Other group does the same thing, terrible, horrible, Nazis, racist, bigots.
Yeah.
Right. And we're just getting tired of it. Now it's gotten to the point where people are dying because of it, because the reason that was given as an excuse by Putin just in the last couple of days to invade Ukraine was that they were Nazis and he was going to denazify them.
Yeah, well, they're dangerous Nazis.
The same rhetoric we're hearing from our leaders in the West.
For sure. So, to continue.
Yep. Sorry. I keep jumping in there out of excitement.
No. It's fine. It's just, like all of these things, there's so many moving parts to this, right? And I feel like I'm trying to summarize a tornado. It's difficult. So I do apologize if I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to stay linear in my explanation of the events. So the Terry Fox statue was accused of being desecrated by the media and by the politicians. And then the war memorial. So not far from there's a national war memorial in the tomb of the unnamed
soldier. It's very
soldier.
close to the front of Parliament.
Right. And apparently somebody urinated on it. Apparently. There was some snow.
Jeez,
it was cold.
listen, okay, can I just tell you something? I was there as a student. That monument is unguarded most of the time, and it gets urinated on from time to time. Drunk people going from one bar to another urinate on things. And in Ottawa, because there's monuments all over the place, they get urinated on. I'm not saying someone should have done it, but the overreaction, you know.
But they had to overreact to something, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right? So the war memorial is desecrated with urine, and the Terry Fox is desecrated with Canadian flags, and there's trash everywhere. They're horrible people. They're racist. They carry Nazi symbols. Now,
and one more thing I want to add. I'm sorry. I keep throwing you off track. But the war memorial, they're like, oh my God, someone peed on it. These people are a bunch of terrorists and they hate Canada, whatever they're saying on the news. This is from the same government where our prime minister a few years ago was doing these town hall meetings because as a narcissist, he assumes everyone's going to love him and love every answer he gives.
Yep.
And a vet stood up and questioned him seriously about why he and other vets can't get the medical and other care that they were promised and deserve. And he said straight-faced that vets are asking for more than we can give right now. And people even there booed him for his answer because we all know it was shit. Same prime minister that offers over $600 million in bribes to the media.
More.
Now, how much can $600 million go for war vets?
Oh, I bet you a lot.
Not including his friends he spends money on, all the new government programs he's made.
The $1 billion We Charity deal. And
billions he's pissed away, but not for vets.
No, not for vets. So this idea that they're going to collect, the media was going to find any instance in and around the protest area and use it as a pretext to give Trudeau the narrative. Now, I expected this from him. You and I talked about this when the convoy was first rolling into town. I'm like, watch for the Nazi labels, watch for the rabble rousers, watch for this. And like clockwork, man, in our media, there was nothing positive about the convoy. Nothing. They were loud. They were rude. They were harassing the locals. They were harassing businesses. They were forcing the mall to shut down. They were costing businesses millions of dollars. Meanwhile, it was the city warning them to shut down, and it was the police doing this, and the police it was just, everything was counter to reality. And then you had all of those YouTubers walking the streets. And look, even if you had 1,000 people that were doing nothing but patrolling with their cameras and their camera equipment, you're not going to catch everything. So am I going to say definitively that no truckers behaved badly? Of course not. That would be crazy.
There was so much, but that was not even including the fact that Facebook and other social media companies were actively looking for these feeds and turning them off.
Oh yeah, almost like as soon as they would go back up, the video would be taken down.
Yeah.
So the first week goes by, Ottawa's talking tough. And then what got really funny was when it became abundantly clear that they weren't going away. So in the first 7 days, when Trudeau finally, I think, made a press conference before he'd returned from his illness, and he said, we're not intimidated.
He came back from near death.
Yeah. We're not intimidated by you. We don't bow to the demands of people who wave Nazi flags. Everything was just
antagonism.
Piss you off. We're not going to bend. We're not going to break. We're not going to listen to you. We're not going to talk to you. You've made your point. Go home.
We should say that other people finally started treating their convoys in their provinces with more respect, started speaking to them in good faith, and in very short order, they disbanded and left those areas.
Coots and the Ambassador Bridge were the two most tense standoffs.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they've never been able to establish a clear link between one or the other.
Right.
I think that they
made it sound like this was like an insurrection.
Yeah.
That's the word that Americans have popularized. I believe they're talking about sedition, which is the proper legal term when it comes to Canada anyways, which, by the way, you're going to get into emergency powers now, right?
Yeah.
Sedition is supposed to be the charge. If they arrest you because you're part of something that's attempting to overthrow the government and they had to invoke the Emergency Act, that means that you should have to be charged with sedition for being part of that. If people are not being charged with that, then why would you even invoke the emergency? You have no legal grounds without sedition.
Right. So what was the fallout to this? So aside from the fact that they started to try and patronize the protesters by saying, listen, your concerns have been heard. Now go home.
Now go.
Yeah,
go away.
Just leave. You're not welcome here anymore. The mayor of Ottawa, you've worn out your welcome. Go away. Listen, fucker, they were never welcome. You didn't want them there.
Not by a political class.
Right.
No.
But these unreasonable people who parked trucks at multiple different sites that were told to them apparently by the police. No, we can't have all these trucks here on this street. Please, can some of you park in this location, this location, this location? Some trucks parked in farms and other private properties outside of Ottawa in 3 different locations. These unreasonable, sedition-ridden racists decided to voluntarily remove
That's a real terrorist group.
Right.
Listen, we got terrorists. We have to ask them to park on a different street. It's unbelievably out of control.
Right. So then they had parties, they lit off fireworks, they had dance parties, they set up screens, they set up bouncy castles. Politicians from both parties could walk through the protest to get to where they were going, yet then in the next breath would claim that their staffers of color or race were terrified or harassed. Okay, sure, maybe. I don't know. But every live stream I ever saw, there were people hugging each other. There were people of Sikh descent. There were Muslims. There were black. There were every race was represented, and not a small number of them either.
So when it comes to people being terrified, it doesn't mean that there's a good reason for it. So you can be terrified for stupid reasons, but it's still understandable how, if you understand the phenomenon, how you got there, it still is understandable why you're terrified. So if they like to talk about racism. So let's say you live in a predominantly white, affluent area your whole life.
Right.
And your whole life where you're living, you're told black people commit crimes, black people are liars, black people want to get your daughters pregnant, black people are violent, they'll try and break into your house, they'll murder you.
All of that's going to be cut.
Right. If this is what you're being told your whole life, and then suddenly you're around a bunch of, let's say, black teenagers that show up at your mall, of course you're going to be terrified.
Doesn't mean it's justified.
It doesn't mean it's justified. So now in government, they have constantly been going on and on and on about how terrifying these truckers are. And before that, they were talking about how terrifying anyone who didn't go along with government orders were. So of course they're terrified, but it's not justified. It's irrational.
Right. So the chief of police, I'm going to jump ahead in time here a little bit.
In case it needs to be said, I don't believe those things about black people. I was using it as an example because they talk about racism all the time.
Fucking racist. So aside from
just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you know, some people are going to say that the truckers claimed tokenism. So any black person that supported them was a token. Any Sikh that supported them, token. You know, any person that was a woman, token. You know,
can't be that individuals make their own choices and have their own values.
Right. The fact that there were families and children there, and I'll get into how all this plays up to it. Right.
Yeah.
So the chief of police, the first one, he resigned. Aaron O'Toole was the first political casualty of any significance.
So he's basically the equivalent of, for Americans, our Republican. He's the Conservative Party leader.
Yeah, and he was a terrible choice.
He was a total liberal, man, completely.
He was a liberal plant. I will say it.
Yep.
It's a conspiracy theory. I admit it. I have no proof whatsoever, but I will say it till the day I die that Aaron O'Toole was handpicked by whoever was in the background to lose to Trudeau. Because during the last election, he was actually leading in the polls nationally by enough of a margin that it was making the Liberals nervous.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, without explanation, he all of a sudden took a blow to the fucking head.
Yeah, suddenly he's like, everything the Liberals are doing this election, I'm doing it too.
Right. And there was, I can't remember the exact point it was, but there was like a point about 3 weeks away from the vote. And then all of a sudden, Aaron O'Toole started saying and doing really dumb,
crazy stuff.
He was like, what the fuck are you doing? And then it became abundantly clear that he was throwing it. He was taking a dive.
Yeah.
All right. And so,
they shut out the Maxime Bernier's party, the People's Party,
yep.
which is formed because he used to be one of the higher-ups in the Conservative Party, and he realized that they were being run by a few people behind the scenes that had nothing to do with the values of conservatives.
Right.
And so he was shut out of that election.
So
no debates or anything.
Aaron O'Toole, for the truckers, when they were coming, he kept speaking out of both sides of his mouth. All right.
Yeah.
I always support truckers.
I don't support them being
I don't support this. I do support this. And he was all over the map. Like, fucking pick a lane. Dude.
Yeah. Have you ever seen one of those TV shows where someone inhabits someone else's brain and the two of them start fighting sometimes over who controls the body?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Pierre Poilievre was in the background.
Waiting for his opportunity. And I think that when he realized that this trucker convoy was actually not filled with a bunch of hate-filled maniacs, he supported it openly.
Yeah, he did. And he only wanted people that did something individually wrong to be punished.
Right. Seems like something common sense.
And so I think he capitalized on Aaron O'Toole's apparent weakness and inability to stake a principled position, and then got enough of the parliamentarians that were in the Conservative caucus to essentially support removing him.
Yeah. So this would be like he basically ousted the leader and is likely going to become the new leader.
I think he would.
So people are trying to take back the party to restore the values of it.
Yeah,
as much as a political party has values.
Now, I do think I have at least some circumstantial evidence that the Liberals know it was Pierre, because ever since Aaron O'Toole was ousted, and then within I think 2 or 3 days, Pierre Poilievre said, "I'm going to run for Prime Minister of Canada, leadership of the Conservative Party."
Yeah,
every single Liberal that has addressed him in Parliament has made some sort of snide remark about his upcoming coronation. They are dripping with venom at this man not because they hate him. They do hate him, but it's not because they hate him. They hate him, and they're doing it because they know that he just fucked their plans without their inside tool.
Yeah,
all right,
Mr. O'Toole.
Right.
Well, Andrew Scheer was just as bad before him, the previous leader.
Right. So without O'Toole in there, they know they don't control Pierre.
Yeah.
At least not yet. All right. I'm not endorsing I'm not endorsing Pierre. I like some of the shit that he does, but it remains to be seen whether or not he's as principled as he comes across.
Right.
All right.
So let me give people an example, and maybe it's going on in your countries as well to some extent. But for Americans, this would be like, sometimes Republicans and Democrats can work together, and they can work together well, right? But generally, if you suddenly saw multiple years go by at the state and federal level where Republicans were acting like Democrats, and they were basically going after the same goals as the Democrats, wouldn't you eventually be like, I think something's happened to the Republican Party here?
Liz Cheney. Aaron O'Toole is the Liz Cheney.
If suddenly that was the widespread leadership at the state and federal level of Republican parties, voters would be like, I think I don't really have a choice here. I think I'm voting Democrat or the other colored Democrats, right? Red or blue Democrats. We have red or blue liberals. For the British, this would be, I think, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, sometimes getting along, but all of a sudden they have the same agendas and they're always backing each other up.
Yeah. So these truckers, eventually they had a GoFundMe that was canceled. GoFundMe canceled it all
and was going to give it to other charities.
Yeah.
But once, I think the way someone put it is, once they realized that was extremely illegal, they just refunded everyone. So that means they lose their cut.
They do lose that, but they are still, I think, being investigated for fraud by Ron DeSantis, Attorney General.
A few places.
Yeah, Arizona, Texas, and I think Florida.
Because this got lots of news coverage, but what if they've done that before?
Right. So now they started a second fundraising campaign, which in half the time raised nearly the same amount of money.
Give, Send, Go was that one. Yeah.
It was a Christian charity fundraiser. And then an Ontario court decided to put an injunction, basically freeze the account.
They ordered them. You must freeze those funds.
And it was funny. The response from Give, Send, Go is, you don't have jurisdiction.
Yeah. Why don't you come here to America and stop us?
It's partially true, though, because they can control the receipt of the funds. They don't necessarily control the sending of the funds.
Right. And Give, Send, Go never said otherwise on that. They're just saying on our end, you don't have any say. We're an American business. This is international banking law or finance.
Right. So they were trying to cut off their funding to finance their ability to remain fueled and fed. But there was so much surplus of supplies, which again just completely decimates this whole they were stealing from the homeless bullshit.
Yeah.
They had so much supplies that they were able to stay right up until they were muscled out.
Trampled on by horses.
And like a 70 to 80-year-old full-blood indigenous woman was trampled by a fucking mounted officer.
She was on a little scooter thing because she had issues walking because she was old and fragile. Yeah. And I saw the footage. She's talking to them. She's passionate, but she's not hostile. It's not.
Yeah, we're a peaceful protest. We're a peaceful protest.
So then they decide, we're going to be these studs. We're going to shock them all by suddenly a doubled up line of horses coming through. They couldn't control their horses. The horses, two of them bolted. One of them dashed all over this one guy. I don't know how old he was, but the other one trampled this old lady underfoot. And the police response, even with the pictures showing clearly that is what happened, they still try to make it like she had thrown her machine under the horse.
They said it was a bicycle.
They said it was, yeah.
Total
disgrace.
Yeah. So before this all happened, though, the police started to get real pressure from the local law enforcement, and they claimed there was a bunch of jurisdictional issues.
There's a bunch of dicks anyway.
Right.
I don't know the jurist part.
I think that silently part of the problem was the tow trucks didn't want to tow.
Yeah.
The Ottawa police actually didn't mind them.
Yeah. This is where emergency powers came in. So for the charges that they got, which was mischief, they froze people's bank accounts, got their personal information, right?
Canceled their insurance.
Canceled their trucking insurance and personal insurance.
Yeah.
Froze their personal bank accounts.
And business bank accounts.
Took out business licenses, so entire businesses went out. And what I try to explain to people is just because a truck that was there has a business logo on its door, which is common, if that's an owner-operator, that means they're there on their own.
Right, so they own the truck, and they are putting the person they're contracted to's name on the truck.
So those businesses that got shut down that were attached to those trucks were attacked because they didn't threaten their contractor and say, now you have to answer me whether you go to a protest, and if you go, I'm not going to do business with you anymore. That's what they expected truck businesses to do. And let me tell you something about the trucking industry. It's not perfect. It has its own issues. But people in the trucking industry do not go around fucking with each other's shit, right? You do not go up to people and start bipping off to them, judging them, or telling them ultimatums. Truck drivers do not respond well to that. That is not the type of people we are.
Right.
And that's what they expected these companies to do. Well, if you don't want to have any truckers left, do the loads you need them to do, that's a great attitude.
Yeah.
Like the company that fired some of us and threatened us, in the years to come, they're going to have they're going to have the worst reputation in our local area. and it's going to be hard for them to hire new talent. So either they're going to have to jack up their prices, which means they're not as competitive, or they're going to lose drivers and they won't be able to carry out their loads.
So again,
just to give an idea how ridiculous this expectation was.
Right. So this peaceful protest is continually framed in the media as violent, harassing, white supremacists, and then terrorists, insurrectionists, and then to make it worse, they say not only do they say that they're harassing the local, all right, but they are engaging in psychological torture with the honking of the horns. So they get an injunction against the honking of the horns. Some listen, some don't. But generally the honking, for the most part, became less severe.
Yeah. When they weren't being targeted, they would actually stop honking when they were told to.
Right.
The only time they started honking again is when the police started coming out and trying to muscle them around.
Right. And that the honking started again as a means of warning for when they started stealing fuel. So here's the weird part is that they didn't go to the gas stations.
By the way, those police did not have warrants for that personal property, right? So even that action was not legal.
No. And I think I don't think the courts will be kind to the truckers because I think our courts are infiltrated by the same types of people that wouldn't want them there anyway. But hopefully there are a few judges that look at this and really examine it on the merits of what was done, at least in time, and then really, really dissect what the police were able to do. But listen, they didn't have to go and steal wagons full of diesel jerry cans. What was stopping the police and the Ottawa authorities from just shutting down diesel fuel sales? Okay, you can fill up your truck here. Like if you're a trucker going into Ottawa to make a delivery, you can fill up your truck with diesel, but you can't get a jerry can. You know, like it's happened before. Right, where you can control the sale of particular goods. So they were allowing these people to go out and spend their money to get jerry cans full of diesel fuel and then seizing the diesel fuel from them in transit. So then they were like, well, we're going to just starve them of fuel. So now you're making people freeze in -30 temperatures on some of those nights and stealing the fuel that's going to keep them warm.
Yeah.
Which is cruel on its own. You may not like what they're doing, but you want to freeze them? Okay, now you're evil. But
so if you live further down south and you want to know what temperatures Canada has, take a fan, walk into an industrial freezer, like at a big restaurant or something.
Yeah.
Put a chair down, turn on the fan, close the door, sit inside there with the wind blowing across you at that temperature. And then see if you think it's cruel that someone should be denied heat in those temperatures.
Right. So the best thing that happened out of that protest was the next day. I got to tell you, every time the media tried to paint these guys as stupid or mock them, like some people even wrote whole exposés about how there's no place to go to the bathroom and there's everywhere's a one-way street and this will never work. And they made it work because these people are masters of logistics.
Yeah.
So then the protesters came up with a genius plan. All right. The next day, when the police are all out on the streets in the bright daylight, all of a sudden, there's an army of truckers and trucker supporters walking with jerry cans, some filled with water, some filled with juice, some filled with nothing, and they're just banging them. And it was a wave of people just coming in with fucking jerry cans, and they didn't know what to do.
Became a Canadian symbol of
resistance.
Yeah, anti-authoritarianism was in Canada was the jerry can.
The jerry can jamboree, man. Like that was fucking
carrying around
beautiful.
some fuel in a plastic container.
It was fucking great. And then the dance parties and the bouncy castles and all of this caught on live stream. After that's the part that I don't understand is that when I watched the politicians, even the conservatives, I was disappointed in where they're like, these are illegal protests. First off, what judge said they were illegal? There's illegal things happening. There's things that violate bylaws happening, but no court declared that an illegal protest. Right. This was declared illegal by government officials without a court order.
And the important distinction is, I might say something's illegal, and I don't have a judge backing me up, or I'm not talking about a judge's ruling. But people in the government acted on it as if it had been ruled illegal.
Right. I'm sorry, but elected officials, whether they are parliamentarians or the prime minister, don't get to declare something illegal because they say so.
So you allow many protests, and the example we'll go to here is Black Lives Matter. They are allowed to go out in front of Parliament. They are allowed to flood the streets, and you do not see them called terrorists, racists. You do not see police trampling them with horses, trying to steal things from them.
Now, listen, the Black Lives Matter protests in Canada didn't get nearly as destructive as they did in the States.
Well, it's because they didn't get as popular.
Well, that too. But let's be clear. They toppled a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald.
Yeah.
All right. So they still did.
That's the first Prime Minister of Canada, by the way.
They still did more damage than the truckers did. In 3 weeks.
Absolutely.
And so all of this culminates into Justin Trudeau finally invoking the Emergencies Act. Now, the thing that you need to understand about our media up here is that if you want to know what the government's going to do next, all you have to do is listen to AM 980 radio, CFPL, 680 radio out of Toronto, Global News, CTV, and CBC. If you listen,
those are the TV ones. They're
TV
most likely in places around the world going to have access to CBC or CTV, but any of those types of things will do.
And if you want to know what the government's going to do, these are the dog whistlers. They tell you what's happening next. They do. They're like, oh, do we need more mandates? Do we need a vaccine passport? Do we need to stop people from traveling on city transit without vaccination proof? Do we need to stop people from going out to restaurants? People have asked me, how did you know this was going to happen? And I'm like, I watched the news.
Yeah.
And it was predictable. Even before the news said it was predictable they were going to do this. It wasn't a conspiracy.
It was about tearing down people's expectation of freedoms. So most people are ignorant about how their government works to a large extent. It was preying on that. So it was replacing with fear the demand. They wanted the demand, or at least it to seem like the public was demanding that our freedoms be stripped away from us for our own safety. And that is not new. I mean, the particular ways they were going around it, that's what we were paying attention to. But it's been done before.
Yeah. And so even the conservative MPs after about a week started asking the convoys to go home. And the Liberals wanted to brand the Conservatives as supporting and enabling the protest. And the Conservatives wanted to brand the Liberals as instigating it and making it worse by not addressing it. Both had their points, but here's the problem. Those protesters weren't going to listen to any party in that building. They were not there at the behest of one or in spite of another. They were there to make their point regardless, in spite of both. And so then I think Trudeau started to look at the popular groundswell of support. Every weekend, the party was getting bigger. The first weekend was big, but I argue the second weekend was much bigger. The party was way, way bigger. Like, I watched 3 different live streams all at the same time.
We kept talking about that saying, Princess Leia saying,
the harder you squeeze, the more systems will slip
through your fingers.
Right. So the media is like, oh, it's still just a fringe. It just looks like a lot. People, it's just a small fringe,
And then suddenly, terrorists and insurrections.
So then...
And I've used this example on my YouTube channel when I talked about this like a year ago. So Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, in 1970, it was called the October Crisis. He actually invoked the War Measures Act, which was the predecessor to our Emergencies Act. And when he did this, it eliminates civil liberties, right? Everything's about the government needing power, so it has to do whatever it takes.
Right.
And the emergency powers are essentially the same thing, regardless of what Justin Trudeau says.
Yeah.
The difference was, whether you agree or disagree with him invoking those powers, the FLQ for about a decade had been setting off bombs in buildings. Right? I was shocked. It was like over 30 bombs or whatever.
It was a lot.
And though they didn't try and kill people, it did hurt people. And the reign of terror that they could cause. And they, so their cause was they wanted to separate from Canada, and they wanted to do it by any means necessary. They were like a militant left-wing group that way. And so eventually, where they went too far was they kidnapped the right-hand man of the provincial government. He was the labor minister in Quebec.
And a British politician.
I think he was in business, though. I don't think he was a government official. He was some kind of
I thought he was an ambassador, but
it's a diplomat of some type or whatever. But anyways, an important person from England. They kidnapped him. So they had 2 hostages. And because of the first one they kidnapped, the provincial and even the city government in Montreal went into chaos. No one wanted to go to work. They all worried they were going to be abducted because he was abducted at home on his own property. So now they were terrified because they didn't know how many of these terrorists were running around. They had terrorists openly speaking in their universities leading up to that. And so...
Now they're liberals.
So after being pressured for a long time by the provincial and city government, Pierre Trudeau finally enacted in 1970 the War Measures Act. And he went on, right after he enacted it, he went on the air, he laid out the situation, the criteria that had brought it into motion, the criteria that would taper it down, right? And these criteria have not been met for the Emergency Act, even to start it, by Justin Trudeau now, let alone all the emergency acts that have been brought in by the provinces for COVID. None of them met any of the criteria either. They didn't say what the criteria was that would start it, making it legitimate, and none of them have said what would end it.
Yeah.
These are legal obligations, and it's been ignored for so long in Canada that essentially Justin Trudeau was able to just whip out the Emergency Act powers without it even being passed yet. So he's beating the crap out of people, violating people's civil rights en masse, going after their bank accounts, and finally, people internationally pressured our media to start questioning this.
Well, what was really funny is that, like,
total madness, man.
The Senate debates, I think, were going against Trudeau, and I think that's why he pulled back.
Well, in the end, yeah, but the reason that things started going against him in the public was not just the protesters. It was because people in the United States were calling him a dictator. People in England were starting to question if he was a tyrant, what was going wrong in Canada.
He still is. It doesn't matter that he withdrew because it was looking bad for him.
But the Senate was going to stop it. I think he was worried they were going to. I don't know if they would have or not, but
the hero of the day, I think, was Don Plett. He's an older senator. Our senators here in Canada are appointed until the age of 75.
Yeah, or death.
And this man went up and he made an hour and 15-minute speech that was an absolute surgical decimation of everything. And like listening to some of the liberal senators was just nauseating. I'm going to pass the act because sexism and racism, and if these were natives, they would have been beaten and tarred and feathered.
Yeah.
And, like, irrelevant. What you were saying is irrelevant. Does the emergency... So even... Here's the general premise of the argument. One side was saying, we need the Emergencies Act to get the protesters and the blockades broken up. Now, you need to understand something if you're an American listener, is that the Coutts, Alberta, Emerson, and Ambassador Bridge blockades were already dispersed when the Emergency Act got called. The only remaining, collection of truckers was in Ottawa, and they weren't blocking a vital trade corridor. They were embarrassing Trudeau. All right,
Yeah.
They were peaceful. By and large, they were peaceful.
Yeah.
They were letting off fireworks and filling bouncy castles and having a dance party. They were an embarrassment, and they were an inconvenience for Ottawa.
Yep.
And he brings in the Emergencies Act and then summons the most unprincipled police officers from across the country.
Well, I don't even know if unprincipled. I would say people who love violence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just waiting for the opportunity. You should, like, if people haven't been paying close attention, like, there's so much footage. One cop throwing this old man around because he didn't like where he parked, hurting this old dude.
Oh, that he honked. That's what he did.
Oh, he honked once. Yeah,
honk, honk. Heil Hitler, apparently.
And the same cop later comes up to a woman, she wants to know if she's permitted in a free country, supposedly.
This is after the protest.
She wants to know, can she just walk down to a certain area? And the cop ends up smacking her phone out of her hand and threatening her.
Where are you from? Alberta. Get out of here. Get out of here. I see you again. You're going to be arrested. It's not going to go well for you.
Same cop. Nothing was done to him. And now, look, he's getting worse.
Yep. So they bring in all these cops and they start smashing windows of empty cars or trucks. And they start slowly marching the protesters back. The entire time, and you can watch multiple live streams. I don't give a shit what the media reports, because the media would still go back to stuff that happened 3 weeks earlier. Oh, they had Confederate flags and Nazi flags on the first or second fucking day. All right. Where were they on the days the police were there? So an indigenous woman is there, full blood Mohawk, gets trampled by horses. You have veterans standing out in front, men who have had limbs severed for our country, wearing their medals of decoration, like their medals of honor on their fucking...
Getting beaten up till the medals are on the ground, yeah.
And they've got videos of one guy getting pulled into a crowd of police. He's down on the ground in the snow, and another cop is bashing him on the head with the butt of a gun.
Another one where the guy's kneeing a guy in the body somewhere.
Oh, God. So that guy actually went on Tucker Carlson.
Oh.
He was one of their more popular truckers.
He was the one that surrendered, right?
He was the one that surrendered. He got out of the truck, got down on the ground, put his hands on his head, and basically went to his knees with his hands behind his back. He was surrendering, and they dragged him out in front of his truck where they thought they were out of view, and two cops ended up fucking kneeing him in the side of the ribs. All right, just like without hesitation.
Yeah, these aren't cops. These are people with uniforms, but they're not cops. And every one of them And it's vital that in the years to come that each one of them is found and tried and thrown into a dark hole.
Yeah. An independent journalist, which Trudeau hates, was shot in the leg nearly point blank with a tear gas canister.
Yeah, from Rebel News. Right?
From Rebel News.
Rebel News is a conservative bias to its reporting, but it is not funded by the government, and therefore it is seen as not real journalists and an enemy of the state.
Right. And then live stream after live stream, and I will keep going back to this. If you want a view of reality, live streams, they're all out there. Zot, War Campaign, oh crap, what was that other one that was really good? Viva Frey went, or Viva Fry.
Yeah.
And there was another one, I can't remember his name. Oh, Ottawax. That was a good one. And they have these protesters yelling freedom, 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 and I think that we will win. And then there was another one where they were singing the national anthem and they were listening to music in the background, and they have a line of people in front, and the cops are standing there like robots. You could tell some of them didn't want to be there. Some of them felt really bad, but they
don't give a crap about Canada. They don't give a crap about happiness. They don't care about people having their rights. They don't care about due process. They don't care about honor. All they care about is power and that feeling of having it over other people.
Yeah. Philip Zimbardo's prison experiment is a perfect representation of what happened.
Yeah.
You gave these guys all the power and the license to use force and
sorry, continue. And I'll tell you one more thing about the police in Ottawa.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's kind of how we talk.
Yeah.
But anyways, like these people are yelling to the police, "We love you. We love you. Like come to our side. Just one of you take off your helmet and join us. This is for your kids too. We love you." And then bang, bang, flash grenades, bang, bang, tear gas, push back, push back, push back.
Yeah.
And like, look, could it have been worse if the police were more unrestrained? I think it could have been worse. All right. I'm not going to give the police credit for not cracking more skulls. All right. But what I'm saying is that if they had just been given carte blanche to be violent, it would have been a massacre. It would have been an absolute massacre.
The reason they had to pull in cops from outside of Ottawa, from across the country, is because they didn't have enough cops in the city willing to do illegal things.
Right.
So they had to form these special units, and they had to bring in a new chief of police
with no scruples whatsoever
to try and make it look official, these illegal actions that they were taking.
Right.
And so one of the things that most people don't know about Ottawa is there's 5 active police forces there.
Or there was when you were there.
When I was there, yes. So they've got I know they've got the Ottawa police still there. I think it used to be Ottawa Carleton. I think they just call them Ottawa now.
Okay.
And they've got the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police. They can operate. They have the RCMP, right? They have the military police. And I forget who the 5th one was, but maybe that was like they counted CSIS or something. They had 5 police forces. And, one of the things we never heard about was no one ever asked people in the U.S. Embassy if they felt worried. They are literally just down the street from the, where Rideau Street meets the canal, right near Ottawa, the Parliament. And so they're just down the street. No one ever went and said, "Hey, can we talk to someone?" Even on the phone, and hey, you guys feeling nervous? So I think the answer would have been, "No, it's a protest."
Are you kidding me?
It's not. They're not outside our building. Like they're down the street. So why would we care?
The fact that CNN reported on this in the States in much the same way our own state media did up here, that they were, insurrectionists, their own violent terrorists, racists, whatever. These people have no sense of irony, or they have a sense of irony and they just don't care, because they really had they had CNN anchors standing in front of burning buildings saying it's a mostly peaceful protest, and then you have these people bouncing in bouncy castles, kids singing songs, sweeping and shoveling and salting, and then when they erected fencing around the war memorial for not for a second time, but after they desecrated it, I'm doing air quotes now.
Yeah.
And then a group of war vets went and took down
the barricades. Yeah.
Took down the barricades. Now here's what's funny. When they reported it on the news, they said that protesters tore down the barricades to get at the war memorial again.
Right.
All right. Tore it down in the minds of most people seems like a vicious and visceral act. Like, I'm tearing this fence down. Right?
Yeah.
And when you watch the video of it happening, these men went over, they clipped whatever the zip ties that were holding the fencing together, lifted them up, carried them over, and stacked them neatly on the ground, and then proceeded to shovel and scrape snow and spread salt out. And one CBC cameraman or reporter was there, and one veteran was yelling at him, "You're a fucking disgrace to this country. You're a piece of shit. How can you sleep at night reporting the way that you do? No, don't you worry. After we're done here, we're going to come and defund you next." Right? He never threatened to kill him. He didn't come off the war memorial wielding a fucking spade and swinging at him. He was just a forceful, angry vet who felt enraged at the way that they were being framed.
Well, listen, you must be mistaken, because I think the best journalism comes from people who get most of their money straight from the government they're supposed to be holding to account.
Right.
I think that's the way journalism works.
And I will say if, because I have hoped and prayed, which is a weird thing for an atheist to do, but I have hoped at the very least that Trudeau would get his comeuppance in the last election, and he didn't. And I was confused and angry.
Well, and how readily they have violated the Canadian Constitution openly and repeatedly, physically hurting people, threatening people, the media always immediately being like a loyal dog on their side. And yet when I say I'm not confident that our elections are sound, people think I'm a conspiracy theorist. Like, you are seeing a demonstration of lawlessness from our government that has never been seen before in our history.
All right. So anyways, the cops beat up the protesters, get rid of them, and then they go through the entire process of invoking the Emergencies Act. It hasn't been ratified by the Senate yet, but they still use the powers. They seize bank accounts. They seize, cancel insurance. They seize these trucks. The MTO in Ontario is canceling business licenses and whatnot. I think 38 trucking companies are essentially out of business now, thanks to Doug Ford and the...
It's a good thing our economy is so strong right now that we don't need people moving products around.
Right.
People who have an excellent record on that because they had the wrong politics.
So the Senate, I think, was going to knock it down. But anyways, Trudeau is to his credit, sly as fuck and a good gambler. All right. So he invokes this Emergencies Act. He gets the result he wants. Ottawa's cleared. Now he doesn't look like a fucking fool. He still looks like a fool, and he looks like a tyrannical fool at that.
Yeah.
And then he goes through the motions even after, like, there's no blockades, there's no downtown protests. I don't agree that the protest should have ended that way or at all, right? And I still agree with the convoy's goals in general. But listen, at this point, that fight is over, all right? The emergency that he invoked it for, which wasn't an emergency, but even if it was, it's over. And then he says, well, they might come back. Well, fuck you, dude. You can read the legislation yourself. Just a plain layman's reading of it is it has to be invoked to deal with a present emergency, not the possibility of an emergency's resurgence.
Right.
All right.
He was trying to lay a comparison between some protesters being there for a week he didn't like, who were peaceful, and when his father did it, people setting off bombs and kidnapping diplomats and politicians.
Right. So
and threatening to murder them. And one of them, by the way, I think it was the labor minister from Quebec, I think was murdered, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. And Trudeau Senior or Pierre really abused that power, which is why Quebec was like the Bloc Québécois was against it and voted with conservatives, which is weird. So up here in Canada, it'd be like, you know, some wing. It would be like the Squad voting with the Republicans on something. Like these are two diametrically opposed groups. You know, people and politicians in Quebec and people and politicians in Alberta don't usually.
Well, for Americans, think of if there was a political group that rose up in one state and they were able to get people elected to Congress based on the idea that, you know, let's say they were Texan and they were like, we think that Texas, or let's say they were from California. And they're like, we think California should secede from the United States because, you know, we're very liberal and you people are all immoral, racist. We don't want to be a part of you. That was their whole bit. And then, of course, them and the Republicans would not get along at all, right? The Democrats not might like them either, but at least they could get along most of the time. But the Republicans then would never really get along. And then things got so bad under Biden that the two of them united to stop him.
Right.
That's the equivalent of how bad we're talking about here.
Right. So the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois vote to not invoke the Emergency Act because Pierre, in his time, when he used the War Measures Act, really went after political enemies of his own.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He fucking abused that shit. He went overboard. Like, he hit his target, and then he just decided to
mop it up a little bit.
Mop up some others, right? So that left a sour taste in the mouth, and that really fueled fanned the flames of separatism that became the bloc as it is. So 7 out of 10 provinces said they didn't want the Emergencies Act. The Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives both voted it down. So what Trudeau did, talking about him being a bit of a gambler, is he knew that not all of his own Liberals wanted to vote for this, that enough of his own party was kind of against this because they didn't think the emergency was legitimate.
Yeah.
And enough NDP didn't want to do it. He didn't have the votes. I don't have anything to back that up except,
I think it was his instinct that this was the problem.
Yeah. So what he did is he made it a whip vote. So if you voted against the party in this vote, you were kicked out of the party. And then he went one step further and he made it a confidence vote. So if you voted against the party, you were kicked out. And then if the vote lost, it went to an election 6 months after our last one. With the way that the numbers are looking right now, and I mean the real numbers, not the numbers that are reported on CBC.
Yeah.
He knows he'll lose the next election in this moment if he did
so
that.
He's going to try not to. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and so he's a manipulator. That is what, he's not an intelligent man, but he's a good manipulator. It's what he's done his whole life.
Right.
And a lot of narcissists are. It doesn't really require high intelligence.
It's like reflexive.
It's just that you get better at it if you have high intelligence. One of the things that people outside of Canada, and many people in Canada, don't seem to realize is that this was inevitable. I predicted this type of behavior from a prime minister when I was in grade 10 or 11 when I was in law class to my teacher. And he was surprised. I was telling him, I told him that if I grew up and I focused on it, I could become a dictator of Canada.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, what makes you say that? And I said, well, because we don't have an executive. Those powers were originally the Queen's or the King's. It was put into the Governor General position here to represent them. But that became basically a position that was just for show. Ceremonial. And so those powers have all gone over to the Prime Minister. Now, to understand this, people outside Canada, the Prime Minister is the equivalent of your what do you call that?
Speaker of the House?
No, Leader of the House.
A Leader of the House, yeah.
But also the President at the same time. Now, imagining that the same guy controlled your legislative body and he controlled your executive branch, you can see why this is insane. And in Canada, anything in the Prime Minister's office, the Supreme Court has ruled cannot be taken by subpoena. So it is protected against anyone ever knowing about it in the name of national security. So now add to that whatever your Speaker of the House does in the White House can never be investigated. Can you see the problem here where this is going?
Right.
Your Senate's not elected. They're appointed by the Prime Minister, right?
Yeah.
The Speaker of the House. He appoints the Supreme Court, right?
And many judges across the country.
Yeah.
Like our judge here in town, who's come down like a hammer on the church in Elmer.
Yeah.
He's a Liberal appointee.
Yeah, of course.
So anyways, all of this is bad for the truckers, all right? Except for the Senate, I think, was going to flip on them. And then this coward fuck, after international pressure, after pressure from the banks, some people have come up with a conspiracy theory because the World Economic Forum wants to move us towards a federated digital ID, and the banks were helping facilitate that the banks were like, if you undermine confidence in the banks, this is going to fail.
They all participate in the World Economic Forum, all right?
Yeah.
All our big banks.
So anyways, he cancels it. After bullying his own cabinet and his own party and backbenchers, and then getting Jagmeet to bully...
That's the leader of
the NDP.
The NDP, which is basically like our communist party that pretends not to be the communist party.
Right. So he bullies all of them to vote with him. So it's a 185 to 151 vote. The Emergency Act is ratified by the Parliament, but now it has to go through the Senate. The Senate is in its second day of debates, and the conservative senators are just shit out of this. They're saying it's a violation of Section 8. It's a violation of Section 2. They're going through the legal precedent. They're going through the moral precedent. Like
it's the equivalent of them getting an order that's written in crayon.
Right. And they're ripping it apart. And I think some legal mind that knows more than Trudeau was watching this going, holy crap, if we do get it pushed through the Senate, even if we do, it's going to immediately be repealed upon, because 10 senators have to sign some sort of a document to start the process of getting it withdrawn. And the court challenges alone would probably end up, like it would lose on a court challenge, hands down, I think. Even liberal judges would have to knock it down.
To give you people also an important piece, because of the way... So one of my issues also was courts are supposed to be a separate branch. But when the COVID restrictions came in, they were all removed from their buildings.
Yeah, they shut down the
essentially,
courts.
Because of that, they were shut down and came under the power in that way of the legislative and executive branch.
Yeah.
Right. Another problem in Canada. They should not have had the power to shut down those buildings. That should have been something that the judicial process came up with on their own.
Now,
the body.
If I were a savvy lawyer fighting, okay, so I'm going to reverse in time 2 years now. So everyone is shocked and enraged, according to the media, about these violent protests that kind of came out of nowhere, caught them off guard. Bullshit. There have been churches that have tried to resist peacefully by remaining open. People who tried to resist peacefully in their own homes by not adhering to the rules of the COVID restrictions and having people over whenever they wanted. And then there were organized movements like the No More Lockdown here in Ontario. And they had peaceful protests that marched in Queen's Park. They marched in Dundas Square, in Toronto. They marched in Calgary. There were protests everywhere over the last 2 years. And Trudeau has the audacity to stand in front of the camera and say, I will always support peaceful protests. But he was dead silent, and the Conservatives were dead silent about the abuses happening at the provincial level.
Yes.
Where police in Toronto were tackling and arresting and roughing up and fining. Fine after fine after fine after fine.
Pass the ball. Or it's a game of cups, right? It's a, what do you call that?
I don't know. The one where they keep the ball. Yeah, the shell game. And
is it under this one? Is it under this one? Meanwhile, they're plowing the ball.
You know, Black Lives Matter protesters and protesters for Lebanon or Syria or whether there were a bunch of I can't remember which movement it was, but it doesn't matter. The point is
Palestinian.
Yeah, Palestinian. Thank you. There were tons of different protests that happened during the last 2 years, right? And there was always this hand wave away. Oh, it's spring. Oh,
Palestinians, they protest. Oh, no big deal. When the Jewish people come out to protest, oh, they're going to get everyone sick. When
No More Lockdowns protests, they're all yahoos and crazy and conspiracy
people,
theorists.
But then when Black Lives Matter protests, well, it's not a big deal. This is for a good cause.
So all of these protests happened when provincial restrictions were at like 100 people, outdoor gatherings were allowed, and the police would come in and just fucking tackle people. And they ran them down with horses in Toronto as well at Adam Skelly's barbecue, right? And nobody in the government. Trudeau ironically says, I will always stand for peaceful protesters. Where the fuck were you when province after province after province was having protests in the thousands?
He was behind the scenes, I'm sure, provoking.
Right. And so he's a liar. He's a fucking liar. All right. And the Conservatives were fucking liars, saying they stood for it too. I don't give a shit if they're provincial or federal. They're fucking, all the politicians up there are fucking liars.
So hold on a second. Just to finish my point about the courts, I don't want to leave people thinking that we have no courts right now, but they are years behind. So to get most things heard, it will take you years to get in front of a judge.
Right.
And this includes the Supreme Court. They're years behind where they're supposed to be. So for people having their human rights outright violated, they're having their personal and business bank accounts frozen, businesses shut down, life-destroying things, right? Being beaten by cops. It'll take years before it can even be heard. And you have to pay a lawyer to continually do all this stuff on and off over those years to touch base with the court.
Yeah. So the
process is the punishment.
Right. So the courts are delayed and laggy. This is going to be a decade before any of this stuff is resolved. And I think that when a lot of this gets resolved, what you're going to see is whatever prime minister is in charge at that time, unless we are, in our great reset, fucking new world order bullshit. But if we're still a parliamentary democracy at that point, you're going to see another prime minister come up and say, I apologize to the people who chose not to be vaccinated. Their civil rights were trampled. You were denied jobs. You were denied equal protection under the law. So our charter is like a retarded cousin to the Constitution of the United States.
It's like their amendments.
Right. It's not bad, but it's not great. But it was the best that could be done given the politics of the time.
Right.
So there is a challenge being brought to the courts, and it's being brought speedily. I can't remember the word.
They're trying to speed it up.
They're trying to speed it up. Now, I want our American listeners to imagine that people like myself and Mr. Dragonbeard are saying that things are unconstitutional. We are not legal scholars. We are not lawyers. But a man named Brian Peckford is the one bringing...
He was a very young premier in charge of the province of Newfoundland.
Newfoundland. He was 36 when he was premier. And so imagine for a moment that your constitution has been... your constitutional rights have been violated. And it's been violated by the government in power at the time. And all of a sudden, Benjamin Franklin comes out of retirement. He's still alive, and he was one of the guys who helped write it. Let's say he's
a funny example because he's one of the oldest people that helped.
Whatever.
Yeah. We'll say it was who was young.
Alexander Hamilton was
he didn't work on that stuff.
John Hancock.
Sure, we'll go John Hancock.
John Hancock.
I don't know how old he was, but
so it doesn't matter. All right, the point is
not the most popular one, but
the funniest one on the signatory.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the people who drafted the Constitution is still alive, and he goes, "Holy shit! Everyone else who helped me write the Constitution is dead, but I was there. I helped negotiate it. I helped write it. I helped go through all the amendments and everything that are in it." This is a violation. And then he goes to the Supreme Court, or he goes to whatever court he needs to go to, and he starts a court challenge. All right. I think that if that kind of scenario exists in the United States today, that every news organization that was independent and free to do so would be interviewing this man going, "Why are you challenging the government on this?" And he'd be like, "Because I fucking wrote the thing. I helped write it. It's wrong." All right. So I've been saying that these are violations of Section 2 of Section 6, the travel restrictions within Canada, saying you can't get on a plane and fly across the country unless you're vaccinated, is a violation of Section 6. And coincidentally, even though I said that over a fucking year ago, Brian Peckford comes out of retirement in British Columbia, and he's challenging the government on Section 6. He says there are more violations he could go for, but the courts don't like it when you go on too many points. Yeah. So he's focused it down to a violation of our Section 6 mobility rights, our right to move across Canada. And so anyways, he's challenging the government on the very mandate the truckers have a problem with.
Yeah.
So the what I'm looking forward to is the mental and legal gymnastics that the courts and the government are going to have to go through to argue with the man who helped negotiate the fucking charter.
Right. And he's not saying that everyone that worked on the charter all agreed with each other.
No.
Right. But what was left when they passed it, and this is bigger than passing legislation because they had to have provinces involved in this.
Right.
So this is like involving all the states. So this is a much bigger deal. So what they did agree on, that is what he's representing. He's like, this is what we agreed on. It meant these things, and you are violating them.
Right.
So this would be, as far as amendments go, maybe something the equivalent of the government starts saying, "Hey, listen, everyone has the right to free speech, right? First Amendment, right?
Yeah.
The government's not allowed to control that, but not speech that's harmful. That's not what they meant. Harmful speech, that's different." And then when people start resisting, they're like, "Listen, now this is an emergency. We are getting rid of the powers of the First Amendment because there's an emergency. You people are a bunch of terrorists and insurrectionists." And then they start moving their way down the list. Oh, now the Second Amendment. Well, that was only meant for peaceful times. Now we're in a time of civil insurrection, right? And then John Hancock comes out and he's like, "Wait a second."
Right. No. Right.
No, this is not how this works.
Like maybe,
and they're like, "You just fucking get out of here."
Yeah, like the media here in Canada has not interviewed Brian Peckford. They have pretended that he didn't exist. All right. Nobody has spoken to him outside of, Jordan Peterson and a few other independent journalists who have interviewed him. He was at the protest in Ottawa. He spoke in front of the central stage in front of Parliament. This is going to be a landmark case. It beggars belief that the Supreme Court, I'm not saying the Supreme Court can't disagree with him, but can you imagine the audacity? Yeah. The audacity that it will take the Supreme Court of Canada, if they do eventually hear his case directly, and the last surviving contemporary negotiator of the patriation of our Constitution and the last surviving signatory of the Charter gets denied?
Well, this is what we call legalism. When someone starts getting legalistic, it means that they have an agenda, right? When they're not just having a natural flow of language understanding. So I'm not saying that laws should be ignored. What I'm saying is they're written in language that should be understood by how they were written,
right?
Not by the interpretation of the time you're living in for what's popular with the people interpreting them in the moment. So, for instance, when they wrote that we have, certain rights in Canada, same with any country, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They weren't able to do certain things.
Yeah, that video you made where you kind of gave me credit where I said in the 1980s when they said, okay, so one of the justifications they said for not protesting was Section 1 said you could have limits. Well, first off, that's a bastardization of what Section 1 means anyway.
Yeah.
But they said, oh, well, you can email your grievances to your representative, or you can post online or on YouTube or on this. Forgetting the fact that YouTube and Facebook can take those videos down for misinformation if they don't agree with you anyway. But
they do work with government on those things,
right? So let's forget the fact that Facebook already curates its content.
It's not censorship; it's curation,
right? So I made the point to Dragonbeard when he was making one of his videos that back in the 1980s, when they said about peaceful assembly and the right to protest, we didn't have social media. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
The only way to advocate for your position in a protest was to get masses of bodies together and march. All right. So the right to deny that because of Section 1. Section 1 of our charter is the exception clause. Imagine your Constitution said, in these conditions, we can just eliminate anything in here. Right. It says it has to be demonstrably justified, prescribed by law, and within reasonable limits to a free and democratic society. Right. So there were 4 categories that it had to be broken down in. It didn't have to be justified. It had to be demonstrably justified.
And in that line, courts have set a standard. There's even a name for it from the ruling.
The Oakes test.
That you have to go through a test to make sure that those standards are being met. And in Canada, we expressly, like openly in law, have a precedent system. So when there's a precedent set, unless you have a specific reason in your ruling to overrule that, other judges are supposed to follow that precedent.
Yeah.
Right? And so this precedent has stood for a long time, and no judges have been adhering to it.
No. Well, at least not so far.
They've ignored precedent, which is a violation of their oath.
So the demonstrable justification, for example, these mandates, they have not demonstrably justified that these mandates for cross-border truckers are necessary. They definitely haven't demonstrably justified that violating our Section 6 rights are needed for cross-provincial travel, which has never been a standard for traveling in your own nation.
Well, this is another thing with the left. They do this all the time now. I'm not talking about moderates on the left. I'm talking about people whose brains think in Marxist ideology and stuff like that. So messing with language, turning things on its head. So quarantine now means not shutting down your borders and controlling them. It means shutting down your whole country and everyone inside being treated like a quarantine. That is not what the language of the Quarantine Act, which until now the federal government was using for all this.
Right.
The Quarantine Act was written clearly. I read through it. It's very clear. It's intended to control airports, land crossings, seaports.
And sick people.
Yeah, and if there's an area near those areas, you can have specific locations where you enact that power. It was never intended and never written for it to be enacted across Canada.
Right. So I think we've kind of wrapped up with the truckers thing, and now we're moving into more the
general
general problems. So problems with the way they've treated protesters in the past, and the problems that they're violating with our Constitution, and like the other asinine things, like, you know, did I not say months ago that COVID, apparently, if you want to believe the origin story, came from an animal, whether it was in
a market right next to a level 4 virus lab. It just happened to occur there.
Regardless,
you're giving benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. Whether it came from a wet market next to the virology lab, or whether it came from an animal in a lab.
Right.
The point is that it's a zoonotic virus. All right. Now, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a virologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't have to be. I can fucking read and understand and comprehend language. All right. It's a zoonotic virus. It jumps species.
Yeah.
All right. So the entire premise of forcing people to get vaccinated is that we became vectors for spread. And then people who became rabid haters of people who didn't get vaccinated was, well, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not protecting me, you're not protecting my grandma. And the news was complicit in this. They started to spread the fear that people who weren't vaccinated were also propagating mutations, that we were breeding grounds for further mutations and variants.
Right.
All right. So forget the fact that much of the poorer sections of the world that can't afford to buy billions of dollars of vaccines aren't vaccinated. Any small percentage, we were holding the country back from reopening. It was our fault that we were still closed. So why is this important with the zoonotic feature of the virus? New York had an animal in the zoo that got infected. CBC News reported that white-tailed deer were infected.
Here in Canada,
Omicron has all of the hallmarks of a virus that has mutated within rodents.
Yeah.
All right. So what we have is a virus that is zoonotic. It can jump from humans to animals, animals to humans, humans to animals, animals to humans, and it can get into any animal.
Well, I don't know what any animal, but a lot of them.
Okay, it has at least been found in many mammals.
Yeah.
All right. So it's been found in all these mammals. And then I started pointing out to people, I'm like, so you want to vaccinate 100% of humans because the unvaccinated are spreading and causing mutations. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, what are you going to do about the rest of the animal kingdom? Because as long as you have animal reservoirs, the virus can mutate in mice, it can mutate in cats and dogs and fucking whatever. It can mutate in all these different species, pick up different variations because presumably your dogs or the mice in your walls aren't vaccinated. All right? Presumably. All right. And then
Very rude of them.
They're fucking anti-vax mice. And then and then jump back. And I really hope that somebody who knows more about this can prove me wrong. But as far as I have been able to find in about 9 months of looking, we have never defeated a virus that had a substantial animal reservoir. And things like smallpox and polio were viruses that did not have extensive or any animal reservoirs of note, right? Which is why when people say, oh, well, you like the fact you didn't get smallpox and polio, bitch, they were different viruses. They don't jump between your fucking house pets and back. Your kid's gerbil's not going to get fucking polio and then give you gerbil polio, all right? I'm not going to get deer COVID, all right? I will get deer COVID.
Most people got their information from the news, and their fear grew from there. And they dug in. That's where they dug in.
They refused to acknowledge any of the information that was given to them by me and other people who were way more qualified.
From the beginning, this never going to happen if we're off base. But from the beginning, you and I looked at long-term, decades-long research and experts who had been around till they were gray in the head with the best reputation. Not the ones that were hired by the government or tried out in front of the news. These were the actual leading experts in their fields. And that's where we got our information, which is why we were able to make predictions about certain things that every time in time they would be sound, they'd be true. Like, okay, so if you want to be scientific about it, if you continually are wrong and then keep pretending you were right, but I am right and you just keep pretending I was wrong,
well,
I think there's no question about who here is the more scientifically minded person.
But here's the funny part, because we've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, right?
Right.
But I'm not going to expand on that anymore. What I found really humorous about a lot of the arguments that I had with people is that if they agreed with the science they read in the news, then they were informed, all right? They only read the surface. They only read the abstract. They didn't dig any deeper. They were told what they were meant to know. And then they would come at you with, well, this means this, and the numbers mean this, and the numbers mean this. And then you present them with a deeper view of the problems and the flaws in their argument, like the animal reservoirs.
Right.
And then instead of acknowledging that perhaps you have a point, they became so entrenched in their media curated view of the pandemic that their immediate reaction to you was, well, where's your PhD? Motherfucker, where's your PhD? All right, we are both lay people in this.
Yeah, this would be, okay, so when we talk about bodily autonomy, like this is not a popular new thing when people argue about, they always think it's about the abortion debate. Bodily autonomy goes back to the end of World War II. Like I say, the first human rights came from the Nuremberg Code.
Yeah.
And without the Nuremberg Code, they would have had no grounds to convict any of the Nazis. So if you dismiss as a society or even an individual the Nuremberg Code and you say it doesn't matter anymore because you're scared or you think people are just being stupid, then you owe an apology to every single executed and imprisoned Nazi.
Ooh, that's harsh.
Yeah, well, that's a fact.
Oh, yeah. No, I know.
And if you don't like that, then you better start really thinking about your priorities and how much you've been manipulated.
Right.
You know, bodily autonomy comes down to not whether you have a PhD. It comes down to simply what you decide.
True. What was the other scientific thing? So there was another person that I had an argument. I think you were there for part of it. But so apparently studies come out that confirms that vitamin D is good for respiratory viruses, or is good specifically for helping reduce the severe symptoms of COVID.
Right.
Okay, so I apologize if I get my terminology wrong. If somebody listens as a doctor and I get something wrong, please understand. Again, I'm just a layperson trying to truncate what I have read, and I'm going to get some of it wrong. But from what I've read, most upper respiratory viruses respond well to treatment with vitamin D because it helps reinforce the epithelial cells in the upper respiratory tract. I might have the terminology wrong, but I'm pretty certain that that's in the ballpark of what's correct.
Yeah.
So COVID-19 is an upper respiratory tract infection. All right. It's a coronavirus in the same vein, in the same family of other coronaviruses. So the way when I said this to the person I was arguing with 8 months ago, they said, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. There's no study that proves that. And I'm like, well, there's all these studies. And they're like, well, that's not about COVID.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, they came to me and said, oh, there's this new study that was peer reviewed about vitamin D and COVID. And I said, yes, I told you about that months ago. And they're like, yeah, but this is peer reviewed. And I'm like, listen, I appreciate that you wanted to wait for peer reviewed research specifically for COVID.
Yeah.
All right. It might give you more specific information about how well the vitamin D helps or doesn't help, like the gradient of how much it impacts the severity. All right. But I responded with this question. I said, all right, let's say the new James Webb telescope looks at a bunch of stars and it finds a transient planet around another star 10 light years away. He goes, okay. I said, do you agree that they have figured out the physics and methodology to confirm that they have seen the transit of a planet? He's like, of course. And I'm like, okay, what shape is the planet they just discovered 10 light years away? And they looked at me and they're like, spherical, like roughly spherical. Like, some of them can be misshapen, but generally spherical because of gravity.
Yo,
I'm like,
how do you know?
Yeah, how do you know?
Have you done a study on that specific planet?
And of course, as soon as I said that, like the response is like, oh fuck, right? I'm like, it's intrinsic to its nature. All right.
Yeah. Well, look, that's the natural scientific play out of what I call personal integrity and as people deal with each other, principles. Difference between simply having a conclusion on the spot and your principles is that principles carry forward through everything. So if once you allow, as a society, your government to start stripping you of your rights because they don't agree with them, then that principle now becomes the dominant one over you having the rights.
Right.
You cannot have conflicting principles. So, for instance, a person whose real principles are, they're just I'm just going to simplify. They're very selfish. They don't really care about anyone else. Then even if they are convinced that they're a very caring person, like, I don't know, Justin Trudeau, you will see in their actions when it becomes any kind of a challenge that they really just care about themselves and they'll do anything for themselves. Whereas somebody else who maybe has a bad opinion of themselves and thinks they're too selfish, but they continually show a selflessness, right? Then that's their principle. They care about being a good person, even in a difficult time.
But we're selfish.
Right. Yeah. But I'm just saying that principles don't turn on and off, right? They must flow. They go through multiple layers and strata and circumstances.
Right.
That's why we have this concept that we identify it.
Right. And it's also a matter of like, there's been a complete abandonment of actual critical thinking. All right. And the bureaucratic doctors, the bureaucratic doctors and the politicians, they exploit that. All right. They know that if they present you a filtered view of what's going on through them, all right, that you are going to look at that as a legitimate source. All right. Yeah. And any source that doesn't come through them is delegitimized.
Right.
All right. Now, listen, I'm not going to say that every doctor that has come out against COVID has been legitimate. There's been some quacky shit said. All right. But listen, it's not like I stopped at the first guy I said who said, it's all a lie. It's fake. It's just micrographine fibers trying to track your fucking movements and hijack your brain. Like, listen, okay, dude, I don't care that you're a doctor. You make no sense. All right. Don't stop at one source. Do not stop at one source. Look at multiple sources. All right. Zoonotic viruses. Look it up, people.
And meta studies like over a long period of time, before it became a hot political button issue. So when we're talking about, what was one of the things that...
I'm getting too high pitched. I'm getting angry.
So, okay, well, one of the things that we will talk about is how viruses do or do not infect people and what you can and cannot control. So I can't remember his name. It's a European. And I know he's not just a professor at Bern University, but is a leader in virology and immunology, right? One of the world's best. But he headed up the department for years, right? So he's I think over 200 different, he's been signatory to over 200 publications.
Cited.
And excellent scientific. But of course, ignore this guy. and listen to the C student who works for the government.
Yeah, or the genocidal maniac that heads up the WHO.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Or Anthony Fauci.
Guy who funded the very shit we are dealing with now.
If the people, what saddens me the most is that advocates for people who were had their human rights violated during the AIDS epidemic,
right,
have not stepped forward to castigate this man and come to the defense of people who want medical choice.
Yeah, because first of all, he started to panic about people with AIDS in the States.
He went on I don't know which network it was, but he had an interview where he said, we don't know if it spreads in the home. We don't know if it spreads from casual contact over long periods of time between children and other family members.
And this was at a time I think they already knew that it wasn't likely to be that way, right?
He suppressed research so that his research could come out first.
That I knew, yeah.
And this is fact. It is indisputable. This is not conspiracy theory. This is undeniable fact.
Well, the very thing that should make you question is how can a guy hold that position for over 30 years? That's
40 years or whatever.
Completely insane and totally unjustified.
Right.
But anyways, the only reason I bring up this other guy from the Bern University, I don't think he's there anymore, but is because, like he says, people like me don't like to come out and talk in interviews and be in the media in any way, because it's not what we do this for. And we tend to be introverts that way. But when he's talking about, he goes, because he's talking about face masks, he starts laughing about these face masks that we use. These are completely useless. He goes, let me give you an example. When I go into a virus lab, I put on a full body suit. It covers every part of my body. And I have to check it to make sure there's no holes and no gaps. And it has its own separate breathing, like its own air system has to be completely isolated.
Yeah, environmentally sealed.
That is the only way a mask can protect you from a virus. And yet they're like, oh, well, the spittle gets caught on. He's like, that's not how it works. No. He goes, research after research for decades has shown that masks do not work.
Yeah, and listen, I love nurses. I think they deserve a lot of credit for the kind of shit that they've been through forever. Not just this pandemic, but forever.
Yeah.
But there are some nurses that are militant about this masking stuff. And I remember saying that there's peer-reviewed research that I can present to you that they've done studies on influenza and masking and shows that masking didn't help. And she goes, I've been doing it the entire pandemic. I am the peer review. Like, that is not how fucking peer review works.
No.
All right.
Or even scientific thinking. Science, okay, so my daughter is just beginning to learn about science in school. She's just in the beginning stages of like formal scientific stuff.
Yeah.
And I like what her teacher's giving her so far. Right off the beginning, they're talking about what science is and what it isn't. Right? So it is about observation. It is not about approaching things with a conclusion, a belief, and trying to prove it. You observe something, you come up with a theory or a hypothesis as to why that thing might be behaving that way, right? What you're observing. Then you test it, and as long as you've tested it soundly, then you see through objective means whether you're right or wrong about your guess. Then it becomes a theory, which means it can still be disproven in other ways, but at least now it has some backing.
What I hope for in the next decade, if my hopeful view of the future is that we come out of this and we recover from all the wars and unrest and broken families and mental health crises, everything that's going to come from this.
Yeah.
Hoping for a brighter future. What I hope happens is that our response to COVID on a scientific level is regarded in much the same way as we regard claims of cold fusion, phlogism, or Peking man. It was a gross misuse of science. It was the merger of financial interests, government malfeasance, and bureaucratic gerrymandering. It was lying by statistics and an absolute assault on the constitutional, moral, and spiritual existence of people in general.
A wholesale destruction of public trust that took generations to build.
Right.
For all kinds of things like the police, the due process of law, whether public health officials could be trusted, your doctor could be trusted. And
I don't trust my doctor now. I have a new doctor now. My old doctor refused to give me a mask exemption. Every time I wear a mask, even for more than 10 minutes, I am sick for a week afterward. Fucking coughing up phlegm and blood and whatever's like, it hurts. I don't know why I react that way. I just do. Right. Yeah. So I've refused to wear a mask now 15 months.
Wearing a mask while I'm going around doing stuff like shopping, it makes me weary, like weak.
And dizzy?
Yeah, I'm 6'2" for anyone who doesn't know. And I said, "Who you going to catch me when I fall?"
Right. But, you can call me, people have called me a pussy about it. And I'm just like, you know what? Fuck you. Fuck you.
Let me shove a sock up your nose and you can run a couple 100 yards and see how you feel.
And I worry. And here's why I worry is that the religiosity that has been injected into science.
No, that's the other thing. Public trust with science. They say you're anti-science. You don't follow the science. You're an anti-vaxxer. All these terms are like when directly interchangeable with you are a heretic. You do not follow the faith. You do not believe the one great truth. Has nothing to do with discussing facts. Has nothing to do with discussion at all.
Right.
You are expected to shut up and obey.
Right. And so this is what I mean. I like, in the short term, I think that the real risk that we run into is that a real virus, whether engineered or natural, rips through the population, let's say 5 years from now, and the people are so exhausted from what happened with COVID or come to their senses and realize that they were lied to. In the short term, the detriment to that is that they will be so suspicious of the next claim of a threat.
There's the power of public trust.
Right. Now public trust is gone. All right. So let's just say for sake of argument, these court cases with the FDA and the CDC in the States reveal severe malfeasance. All right. And that the vaccine.
Seems like that's where it's going.
Okay. So let's say these vaccines do not work, actually cause immunity exhaustion. A whole other litany of problems.
Or even just they come with risks, but they don't have the benefits that were promised.
Right. And that this virus was not causing the death in the amount that it was, that deaths were logged incorrectly, which has been an argument that's been, doesn't matter. Let's just say worst case scenario, everything that we were told, or at least a good chunk of it, was an absolute fucking fabrication. All right. And now this court case blows up. It's all over the news. The news has no choice but to admit, and then the news will try and save face and say, oh, we were lied to by government officials. Somebody goes to jail, but it's always the low-level or mid-tier guys. None of the high-level people go to jail, as is usual. And then the public is enraged, and, there's court cases and fines and fucking settlements and whatever. The general shit that happens when rights are violated. And then all of a sudden, the next administration in the States and in Canada or around the world say, oh my God, there's a new virus and this one's fucking real. And then they go to the public and they say, guys, we need to do this. And they are coming at us with evidence and not just fucking computer models, but I mean hard evidence, right?
Yeah, results, control. And one of the problems also that was brought up is control groups. How are you going to have control groups when you're trying to get everyone to take this yet still being tested experimental vaccine?
Yeah. But that's what I said. So my fear is that something like this can happen. I hope it doesn't. But
one of the things that pissed me off too is most people in general don't know the difference between inoculation and vaccine. What this is it's an inoculation. They've changed the definition of vaccine for this purpose.
It's a prophylactic at best.
Well, let's just say that as long as you every 6 months get a shot, it's going to protect you from this virus, right? That is an inoculation. So the example I give people is I learned this on Star Trek when I was younger. So Beverly Crusher or Bones, they come into there's radiation poisoning. People are feeling sick. So they come in there and they go, here. They use the hyper spray thing that they have, right?
The hypo spray, yeah.
Yeah, the hypo. And they're like, oh, I feel better. What was that? It's an inoculation. It'll make it so that you won't get as sick. You can resist the effects of the radiation.
Yeah.
Right. At no time is that called a vaccine against radiation. It's something that if you stay in the radiation, it will still eventually need another shot and it will eventually harm you. It's not an immunity.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if you give a vaccine, it is supposed to give you an immunity.
A sterilizing immunity.
Right. Or at least a good chance of it. So, and these distinctions matter. You shouldn't obsess about every little distinction in language, but you also shouldn't dismiss them or pretend or even say that that there is no distinction, because that's madness. The equivalent to me of this lack of distinction or how they're trying to smear this together would be like someone going, hey, it doesn't matter if you lease a car or buy a car. It's the same thing. Like, no, if I buy a car, I own it. If I lease a car, I have to keep paying for it or they take it away. It's like, yeah, but why would you stop paying for it? I mean, both cars have expenses along the way. And there could be an accident and you lose either one anyway.
Look, following the numbers in Canada for the last 6 months about this vaccine versus Omicron, or not 6 months, let's say 4 months, right? Following the infections, they're like statistically, there's still more unvaccinated, I guess, if you look at it in raw numbers. But like, it's like 1/4 are vaccinated and 3/4 a quarter are unvaccinated and 3/4 are vaccinated. And their explanation for why more vaccinated people are getting sick is, well, of course there are more vaccinated people. Like, I understand the reasoning around that, but it does seem to be rather manipulative. But listen, I think these vaccines are about as effective as farting in your gas tank. All right, like,
it doesn't matter, man. One's gas, the other's gas. No difference.
I turned my key and the fucking car don't start.
I went to Webster's and they changed the definition for me, so it's the same thing now.
Yeah. So, like, listen. You know, other scientific arguments that have been brought forward by people smarter than me, and I'm a hobby armchair scientist, and I'm not even, like, that's even wrong. I'm not a scientist. All right, but I love science. And I think that there's a distinction to be made between a layperson who listens to what the news tells them and then considers himself informed, and a person who has a love of science, the scientific method, scientific methodology and thinking. And I'd like to think that I'm one of those people. Not all the time. I'm human. I fucking make jumps of reasoning that are unfounded, and I try to correct myself when it happens. But there are things like, I'm going to mess up the term, environmental attrition, when organisms change because of the environment.
Entropy.
Well, not entropy. No. Like punctuated equilibrium. There was a term for it. And somebody's gonna fucking listen to this and be like, "Oh, you've said it before." But what I'm saying is, like,
you're just blanking on the word. As long as we know what you're talking about, that's all right.
Right. So like organisms, whether they're viruses or whether they're DNA based, whatever, they respond to the environment around them.
Right.
All right. So this is how evolution works. All right. So there's been some scientists of good reputation that have said that when you introduce a vaccine into an active pandemic, all right, or an inoculation into an active pandemic, that you are introducing a vector for the virus to respond to, right? It has been keyed to react to the body this way, and then all of a sudden bodies around it are being inoculated.
Yeah, this is a bigger concern for things that mutate quickly.
Which COVID does.
Yeah. In fact, here's another little tidbit for people, that coronaviruses are the standard that most labs use when they're experimenting with viruses and their mutation, because they mutate so quickly and readily.
Right.
And most people have no idea about that. So that type of virus, from the beginning, I was aware that this would be impossible to stop it.
Right. And what was the other one? So one of the studies that came out about COVID, specifically the Omicron variant, was that they thought it came from mice. And I was like, well, okay, it jumps species and it's a zoonotic virus. So why do they think Omicron specifically came from mice? So I dug a little deeper.
It's probably because of the whole thing about that celebrity who likes gerbils in his butt.
Richard Gere.
Why was it Richard Gere that everyone pinned that to? I wonder where that came from.
So there was a YouTuber who goes by the name of Dr. John Campbell. This is his channel. And he broke it down. And you know, like, listen, when people disparage YouTube as a source of information, it's not like I'm watching SciShow or, you know, Markiplier to get my scientific information. You can find useful information on YouTube. You can.
Yeah.
All right. So this doctor basically broke it down. And again, I'm probably going to botch some of the facts, but generally speaking, nobody can argue that we haven't used rodents for 60 to 70 years in laboratories.
Yeah.
All right. So there are specific, again, I'm paraphrasing, that there are specific markers that are indicative of a virus that has mutated within a rodent host. All right. And that Omicron has most, if not all, of those markers. All right. So when you extrapolate it back and you see it jumps back to humans, it has these specific mutations that occur specifically
there are
within
ways to deduce that it's been involved with the rodents.
With the rodents, right? And I mean, I remember I pointed this out to one of those people that I was arguing about zoonotic viruses in animal reservoirs, and he's like, "I don't come into contact with mice." You know, that's a stupid argument. And I'm like, no, that was the dumbest response I ever heard. Listen, you don't have to interact with the mouse yourself. Somebody else has let's say the guy next door to you has a dirty house and he's got mice. So that mouse jumps up on him, gets COVID, runs back into the wall. The rest of the mice in his house get COVID, and those mice go out and they roam the neighborhood, infect cats or whatever, and then get back into the house and reinfect his kids with the mouse variant, right? Now that kid becomes patient zero of this new mouse variant, and then it spreads out. You don't ever have to interact with a mouse directly.
Yeah.
You just have to interact with a person who has interacted with a person who has interacted with a person down the chain of contacts.
Right.
That's how these things happen, all right? Like, it was just...
It's this what the news and these international bodies and these governments that are run by morons have done is they've created a panic mentality. I think people are starting to wise up. But it amazed me how long this ran. And I hope we have more resistance and questions the next time the government tries to do this, and that people follow up a little bit about just exactly how insane this was and the cost in people's lives, not just people that died, but the ruined lives and the way that we've robbed children of all kinds of opportunities that are normal developmental opportunities.
Well, I talked about those,
way back you talked about that.
Yeah. The development of children, the stress on families. I argue now, this is my hypothesis, it is just a guess, but I think that more people are getting sick now, not just because of sanitizing our environment around us, and generally trying to avoid all pathogens, which we need to contact some of them, otherwise our immune systems have nothing to practice on.
Right.
To quote the late, great...
George Carlin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, virus comes
viruses, you fucking pussies.
But
you'll die and you deserve it because your immune system is weak.
Right. But I think more people are getting sick now, even with a weaker variant. Like I wouldn't say they're sicker than they were with previous variants, but they're getting sick more often. Not just because it's a more transmissible variant, but because we've had 2 years of stress, anxiety, fear. These things, financial strain. Social isolation, all of these psychological factors have a bearing on physical health. Right. To say otherwise is disingenuous at best and grossly dishonest at worst.
So,
or criminal.
We've been going for 2 hours. So let me just say, we haven't done anything in about 6 months. I do all the recording and stuff like that. And the reason is there's a few reasons for it. One of them, though, is that from the very beginning of this, I saw the threats. Just my life experience, the type of person I am, and it just started getting, I think it was wearing me down. I was burning out.
Yep.
And
me too.
By the time I got fired from my job, which is very dehumanizing, and it just feels really shitty. It's not like I crawl up in a ball and died or anything, but it feels really bad. And I think that's why, it's been a while after that. First of all, I think I had the stress period.
Mm.
And after that, my body basically gave up I was sick for 2 weeks, had a cough following that for a week. I thought I was okay. Then I had my shoulder go out on me. And then I thought I was okay for a few days. And then recently I fell down the stairs outside my house.
Yeah.
Out some mice. That I don't think is really related, but I'm just saying, this stuff has taken a toll on people. I think that we're in a good position now to start recording again.
And I'm not going to promise that we'll do it more often because always life comes up first. We're not Joe Rogan.
Right.
We're not on Spotify. We don't get paid to do this. We're two buddies sitting around pretending like we know shit.
We are the oracles.
Yeah. We
know the future. Should we not get into a new topic because we've been going so long?
Yeah, we shouldn't, but we should maybe make some predictions.
Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah. So my prediction, and we like to do some predictions at the ends of our shows just to check on them months or years later. I think that there's a good chance that by midsummer, Brian Peckford's court challenge against the constitutionality of the vaccine mandate for travel will succeed on its merit, and the precedent will be set that you cannot limit people's mobility based on vaccine status.
Good.
At that point, I think that there is a high likelihood that all vaccine mandates at a federal level will be dropped. And I think it will open the door for all other provincial and federal mandates to be challenged. It'll take years, but I think that will be the first nail in the coffin of this COVID bullshit. That's my hopeful prediction. My political prediction is that Trudeau's brand has suffered irreparable damage, and that at some point within the next 4 to 6 months, his own party will turn on him. and through whatever internal process they have, will oust him as their leader. And then you will start to see the slow drip, drip, drip of what really happened behind the scenes, like how he held dictatorial control of his party.
Yeah.
That is my hopeful political.
And I think that it's possible that they'll find that he was actually using his office in his communications. I think that they might actually find that he was colluding with foreign powers about coordinating his own responses in ways that were
highly illegal.
Yeah.
Your predictions? I'm only going to do 2 because if I do more, I'll go on forever.
My prediction going forward is that there isn't a significant shift in the West away from woke politicians and people who cater to it, all of this Marxist ideology madness, and back to a more practical way of running our lives. I believe that Russia and China will continue to become greater allies. Russia will continue to try to reassert itself militarily and otherwise over its old bloc that it had under the USSR.
Yeah.
And I think China, beginning with Taiwan, once I think he will, if this continues with Ukraine, I think he will attack Taiwan. If he does attack Taiwan and there aren't savage consequences about it, I think after that he will then begin seeing, his eyes will start looking out at places like Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, essentially, as his picking ground. And so what we're looking at is potentially the stages of an actual world war with different players on different sides, perhaps, but this is a direct result of us allowing ourselves to become so weak that these predators are now looking for sheep. And that doesn't mean that they're not responsible for what they're doing or what they might do, but this is my great concern. So if you want to call it a prediction, you can. We can avoid it. We can't avoid the invasion in Ukraine, but we can at least avoid making these things worse. But it will require us to sack up and stop voting in all these lefties who talk about microaggressions and calling everyone a racist all the time.
Right. Is that it for your predictions?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to end it on one more thing then.
Yeah.
Part of my problem why I haven't been available to record is that my anger, my outrage at what has happened to my friends, my family, the people around me over the last 2 years, and what's happened to me, right? The changes that I've seen in myself is that I've become far more hostile, a lot more nasty, and a lot more impatient. And although I want to draw back on that, like I want to take that back for people out there that are feeling the same, like you want to reach out to that friend or family member that, laughed in your face and told you were stupid or anti-science or anti-this. You do you, but I'm going to tell you what conclusion I have come to. It is perfectly justified to feel angry at being dismissed and derided and insulted and having every boundary, both personal and private and political and religious, violated.
And can I just add this really quickly? It is a false equivalency and totally dishonest of someone to try and say that their position of stripping you of your freedoms and your rights is the same as you standing up for your freedoms.
Yeah, it is not the same.
It is bullshit, and a person who makes that argument is either f***ed in the head and doesn't know any better, or much more likely they don't care and they're coming from a bad place.
Right. So I have made the hard choice most recently, but over time, to not forgive. Now, some people might look at that and say that I am taking the low road, and I'm okay if that's the way that you want to label it. But until these people come to their senses and realize and apologize for the direct attacks on me personally, but they should apologize, like the people in your own life should apologize to you.
Yeah.
You are under no obligation to show deference or kindness to those people that would have spit on you when you were at your lowest.
Right.
And now that we're coming out of this, and I know the world's still in chaos and Ukraine and everything, it's bad, everything's still bad. But when we come out of this, those people that will eventually reach out to you and try and take the high road, like they're the bigger person. That it's fine if you personally want to forgive them, but I'm not ready to. Because I don't need them to come begging and crawling on their bellies. What I need them to do is to show an ounce of humility and self-awareness and realize that what they did was beyond mean-spirited. It was evil.
One of the things I've tried telling people before is I had to come to this understanding on my own. So something that things like Christianity and modern psychology tend to have in common is that they try to equate forgiveness with as necessary for being healthy. That is not always the case.
No.
If you can forgive someone, by all means do. But if you try and force yourself and pretend like you're forgiving someone who is mistreating you or has mistreated you, if you can't forgive them for that, if you can't honestly do it, that is okay. What is important is that you're able to move on with your life. That's the part about health.
Right.
So I'm not telling you to hold grudges against a bunch of people in your life, but in this case, if someone is proactively continuing to have a harmful attitude towards you, then saying that you forgive them while they're still doing it is not a healthy place to be.
Right. I'll make the final example here and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So, for example, politically speaking, it is my personal position that if you vote Liberal or NDP, you are in Canada, you are making an immoral choice, a demonstrably immoral choice. These people have violated your rights. They have violated your personal bodily autonomy, your medical freedom.
They've subverted the Constitution outright, repeatedly.
And they've done this en masse and with gleeful, reckless disregard for any individual. And so if a person comes to you and they say, well, I didn't vote for Jagmeet Singh or I didn't vote for Justin Trudeau, I voted for this person who's a member of his party, that doesn't cut it anymore. Here's an example, and I know it's inflammatory and people don't like it when we do that, not when we or when anyone does this, but if the Nazi party was the liberals of the day, I don't care that you're voting for the nicest Nazi on the block.
Right.
All right? He did, that Nazi doesn't want to kill the Jews. Listen, I don't care. He follows the party line when it comes to the vote.
What did we just see? We saw every member of the NDP and every member of the Liberal Party all vote in lockstep.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how nice your local guy is. Are they that nice? No, they're not that nice.
A vote for any Liberal right now or any NDP member is a vote for the platform of their party, and that platform...
do not let people shame you by saying... right wing this, extreme right, anything left of Mao or anything right of Mao or Stalin is right wing to these people.
Right.
Just ignore those expressions.
Right.
Ignore their threats. They're going to call you a racist.
And you know what? If people want to say that my position of cutting people out of my life who continue to try and justify these votes for these kind of people or justify the use of the Emergency Act, because I've cut people out of my life who agreed with the Emergency Act. It was only 9 days or 10 days ago that this happened, and already 2 people gone. I'm not associating with you anymore. If you think what happened to those truckers was justified at any level, f*** you. That's it. You're out. I'm a better person with you gone.
Yeah.
Period. Anyways, that's enough.
Yeah.
I love you guys. I hope you like our show. I know we're all over the place.
We will have guests again as well.
Oh, we will. We definitely will.
I know Jim was already talking, but he wants to talk to us on Skype, so I assume that means...
You should upload this tonight.
I'll probably upload it tomorrow.
Okay.
Because I'm going to go to bed so I can get the little one to school on time.
Oh, I'm sorry. How late is it?
I don't know. It's not bad.
All right. Talk to you later, guys.
Bye.
The Emergencies Act. It's for emergencies. If you fail to act, Emergency Act. Not available in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba.